Furiosa lives with her tribe in a green oasis amidst an arid desert. One day, she and her friend go out to gather fruits. Suddenly, the girl notices strangers in the forest. She sneaks up to their motorcycles and disables one of them. However, when she moves to the next bike, the girl is spotted. Furiosa blows the whistle that her tribe uses to signal danger and starts running. However, the girl is captured, tied up, and taken away. But her signal was heard. The entire tribe rushes to her rescue, and the girl's mother, Mary, arms herself, mounts a horse, and gives chase. Mary pursues the kidnappers for a long time, eventually catching up to and killing the slowest one. She then takes his motorcycle and continues the chase. Soon, another bandit's motorcycle breaks down. Two others stop to check for pursuers. During this time, Furiosa bites through the fuel line of the motorcycle. Her captor doesn't notice this, and seeing the pursuit on the horizon, the bandits ride on. Meanwhile, Furiosa's mother finds the second bandit's motorcycle and switches to it. As evening falls, the bandits stop to check their bikes. They realize the pursuit isn't far behind. One suggests abandoning the girl, but another reminds them of their low status. Bringing the captive girl back would raise their standing in the gang. While they argue, Furiosa manages to free her legs and runs away, but the bandits notice and catch up with her. Morning comes as Mary catches up with the kidnappers. She sees them through the scope of her rifle, but shooting now is risky as they are close to the bandit camp. Nevertheless, she shoots one. The other bandit, however, has secured Furiosa to his back, making it too risky for her to shoot. The bandit rides into the camp, sparking a dispute among the biker gang members, each wanting the girl for themselves. However, her captor claims he has seen a place of abundance, causing excitement among the crowd. The bandits decide to take the girl to their leader, Dementus. Mary follows them. On the way, Furiosa manages to push her captor off the motorcycle, preventing him from revealing the oasis's location. Dementus tries to intimidate the girl, but she remains silent. The bandit then resorts to trickery, ordering her to be washed and fed, promising to send her home the next day. Meanwhile, Mary disguises herself in the clothes of the last bandit she shot and heads to Dementus's camp. Furiosa is taken to a tent where a servant cleans her up. Seeing Mary in a helmet, the servant gets scared and begs not to be harmed, promising not to raise the alarm. Mary spares her, but as soon as mother and daughter leave, the servant runs to the warriors. A chase quickly ensues following the tracks of Mary's and Furiosa's motorcycle. Realizing they can't escape together, Mary orders her daughter to ride away. As a parting gift, she gives her a peach seed and makes Furiosa promise to plant it and protect the green lands. Furiosa rides away but stops and watches as her mother fights Dementus's hordes. Mary fights bravely, but cannot overcome all of them and is captured. The girl, crying, runs to her and manages to see Dementus's men brutally executing her mother. Dementus promises to release both if the girl shows the way to the oasis, but Furiosa only cries in grief. Dementus takes the girl and locks her in a cage. She is forced to watch the bloody competitions Dementus loves to hold. He tries to appease the girl and even gives her his favorite teddy bear. Dementus's history specialist offers to teach her to read and write, suggesting she could become a historian, but she plans to escape back to the Greenlands, tattooing the path onto her arm. One day, Dementus and his horde, searching for the place of abundance, encounter a strange warrior who claims to have come from the citadel where there is everything. Dementus decides this must be the land they seek and heads in that direction. Soon they reach the impregnable fortress guarded by the army of Immortan Joe. Dementus delivers a fiery speech, trying to rally the common people to his side. However, the citadel's leader offers to choose one of his warriors to begin the battle. Dementus's servant points to one of Immortan Joe's soldiers. The soldier takes up his weapon, says goodbye, and jumps into the midst of the biker warriors, where he detonates himself, taking many enemies with him. But Dementus cannot retreat. The battle begins. Immortan Joe's men skillfully capture Dementus's motorcycles and cars with hook chains, lifting them into the air. They do this with Furiosa's cage as well, but the history specialist manages to latch onto the cage, and Dementus himself comes to help. They free the girl from the cage and flee. Sometime later, Dementus rebuilds his horde and plans to capture one of Immortan Joe's military bases, Gastown. First, he stops a fuel tanker headed for the town and forces his people to disguise themselves as Citadel warriors. Disguised as Joe's men, they head to the town, whose guards, at the last moment, open the gates for the suspicious convoy. Dementus's men capture Gastown and now can dictate terms to Immortan Joe. Learning of this, the Citadel leader agrees to negotiations where the bikers demand tribute in the form of supplies. Dementus's people display the head of Gastown's leader, threatening to impale it with an iron spike if Immortan Joe does not meet the biker's demands. Realizing he cannot defeat the bikers outright, Joe agrees to consider their demands, but he notices Furiosa in the crowd. Seeing his interest, Dementus claims the girl is his daughter, but for the first time in a long while, Furiosa speaks and accuses Dementus of killing her mother. Eventually, Immortan Joe allows Dementus to rule Gastown, promising to supply the bikers with some food and water in exchange for Furiosa and the biker gang's mechanic. Angered, Dementus takes the teddy bear from the girl. Furiosa is taken to a room where Immortan Joe's women rest. On this day, one of his wives gives birth, but the child is again born a mutant. While the girl watches, one of Joe's warriors, Rictus, notices the bells in her hair. Realizing she has caught his interest, Furiosa cuts off her hair and makes a wig with the bells that night. Later, Rictus takes her to his quarters, where he examines her and finds the star tattoo on her arm leading to her home. But, fascinated by the jingling hair, he starts to stroke it. The girl twists away, leaves the wig in his hands, and escapes. Sometime later, Furiosa, who managed to trick her way into a crane operator brigade, earns praise as a fearless boy who lost his voice in one of the wars. No one can even imagine she is a girl, not a tough mute boy. Only Rictus once notices her familiar eyes, but doesn't have time to understand as construction begins on a well-armed supply truck to withstand raider attacks in the lawless wasteland. Considering the situation, the girl plans to escape, hiding a motorcycle and supplies under the main truck. Sometime later, during another trip along Fury Road to the fuel farm, the truck is attacked by marauders who left Dementus's gang. The truck's guards engage in battle, which takes place while moving. The Separatists use everything, including parachutes, to capture the vehicles. Taking advantage of this, Furiosa descends under the truck to free the motorcycle from its chains. During this time, a technician descends to replace a part of the damaged hose but falls, managing to pass Furiosa a spare part. One of the attackers approaches the truck and attaches explosives to its underside. Furiosa saves the truck and, risking her life, fixes the breakdown. The Separatists don't relent, and the driver does everything to shake off the pursuers, but they are persistent, and almost all the guards are killed. Furiosa climbs onto the truck's hood, her helmet is knocked off, and the driver, Praetorian Jack, realizes she is a girl. Furiosa climbs into the cab, and together with Jack, they fend off the remaining Separatists. In the end, all the military guards are killed, leaving only Jack in the truck, Furiosa, and a mutant who, at her command, releases spiked balls, destroying the flying vehicle, but dying himself. The girl returns to the cab and tries to kill Jack, but he throws her off the truck and leaves her on the road. However, he later returns and offers to create a new convoy with her, respecting her bravery. Furiosa becomes Jack's deputy and receives the title of Praetorian. Meanwhile, Dementus, with his inability to manage, practically destroys Gastown's infrastructure, leading to worker dissatisfaction. Realizing no better opportunity will come, Jack proposes they flee, providing Furiosa with everything needed. However, they make another trip and find chaos, which Dementus unsuccessfully tries to quell. Realizing he cannot succeed, Dementus calls a council at the Citadel and orders the truck to leave, leaving supplies behind. Learning of this, Immortan Joe becomes enraged and orders Furiosa and Jack to collect weapons and ammunition in Leadtown. That evening, Jack confesses to Furiosa that he wants to help her because he still remembers his parents. The girl shows him the star map on her arm and offers to leave with her. During their last trip, Jack orders the crew to load the tanker with everything necessary and has Furiosa drive the escort vehicle. However, when the truck arrives in Leadtown, they fall into an ambush. Jack sends a signal ordering Furiosa to flee while he leads the enemy away. But driven by revenge, the girl opens fire with a sniper rifle, trying to kill Dementus. Seeing her, the biker leader fires a grenade launcher at her. Jack, thinking she is dead, destroys the tower where Dementus is hiding. Hanging on the edge, Dementus manages to see Furiosa saving Jack from the abyss where the truck fell and driving away with him on a motorcycle. The pair reach their vehicle left outside the gates and drive off. A surviving Dementus gives chase. On the way, Furiosa tells Jack the route to the place of abundance. Meanwhile, Dementus's men catch up with them. Jack tries to stop the pursuers by firing a rifle, but their vehicle is forced off the road. Furiosa and Jack are dragged out. Enraged, Dementus orders both to be killed, but Jack must die first. Furiosa is chained and forced to watch as they torment her friend. But as evening falls, Dementus sees a hand hanging from a chain with a star map. The girl has cut off her own arm and is now riding away on a stolen motorcycle. With her last strength, she reaches the citadel where she is taken to Joe. The girl recounts everything that happened and helps plan the war against Dementus. Through trickery, they convince Dementus that the warriors have left the citadel for Gastown, and the horde rushes to the fortress where most of the bikers perish. In the meantime, Furiosa, having lost her way home, shaves her head, replaces her hand with a mechanical prosthesis, and prepares for battle. She seizes a vehicle the Praetorians prepared for pursuing Dementus and sets off alone. Meanwhile, Dementus and a few loyal followers try to flee, but Furiosa catches up with him in the desert. Dementus orders his companions to scatter in different directions to throw off the pursuer, but the girl confidently follows his tracks, killing his aides one by one. After a long chase, she finally catches Dementus in the desert. He lies down before her in submission but mocks her, saying revenge will not heal her. Furiosa chains him and reminds him of her murdered mother, but he suddenly confesses that he became this way after his wife and children were killed. He reminds her that no amount of his suffering will bring back her loved ones, and he has a very high pain threshold. Furiosa beats him, but soon realizes he is right. Revenge does not alleviate the pain of loss. When Dementus loses consciousness, she takes his teddy bear, and he finally recognizes her and proposes they join forces to conquer the wasteland. But the girl throws away the toy. A voiceover narrates that Furiosa imprisoned Dementus in the citadel, using his living body as fertilizer to grow a peach tree from her mother's seeds. Later, she receives command of a new truck, hiding 5 of Immortan Joe's wives who want to escape from him. The new Mad Max movie is filled with fury and a thirst for revenge. It has an excess of harsh and unpleasant scenes, but it also has its philosophy, soul, and hope that even in the most unbearable conditions and the harshest trials, one can remain human and stay true to their goal. The man opens his eyes in the middle of a lake with a red drone flying overhead. Visions of his family, spaceships, and shootouts flash before him. Finally gathering himself, the man swims towards the shore, accompanied by the drone, which he calls Ezra, to check his mental health. Suddenly cries for help echo from the lake, and another man, followed by a woman, appears. None of them remembers what happened to them. Fina recognizes the wreckage on the shore as the remnants of a warship called Karik, and Ezra recalls an invasion. Then the men discover the remnants of a car that must have been there for centuries. Apparently, there used to be a road in this place. People remember the invasion, and it turns out they all died in different years. Moreover, Abram confesses that he is 67 years old, although he looks 25. According to the red drone, they were brought back to life in their prime years. Their memories are different because they died at different times. Around them is Earth, but 400 years after the extinction of humanity, destroyed by aliens. They were resurrected by creatures living in the water, called sparks. The ultimate goal is the revival of humanity, and the rest of the information can be found in the settlement where the others who have returned live. The drone orders Ezra to collect the sparks. Gathering their meager belongings, the people set off after the drone, trying to understand why the Kariks revived them. Soon they find partially destroyed arches, and Abram rushes to them, rejoicing in his young, strong body. On one of the structures, he sees unknown hieroglyphics and touches them. The man is thrown back, and he admits that he saw everything. Suddenly, the red drone is shot down, and a second shot wounds Abram. The trio runs behind a hill where Ezra, setting up an ambush, captures the pursuer. The man, named Jax, denies the existence of the settlement. The glowing substance on his neck is a skin rider, which is one with the human body. He needs the sparks, but Fina confidently demonstrates her proficiency with a weapon. Abram insists that when he touched the unknown symbols on the arch, he felt the vastness of outer space. But this elicits mockery from Jax, who suddenly frees himself and lunges at Ezra. However, Fina points his own weapon at him. This time they tie the man securely and leave, despite his claim to know Ezra's brother. Soon the team takes shelter in a cave, while others with glowing parasites on their necks are found, including Ezra's brother Silas. Meanwhile, the resurrected people in the cave discuss ways to recreate a human being and wonder where the aliens obtained the initial material.
During the night, Abram's wound becomes inflamed. He is lowered into a small pond where the sparks are released. By morning, Abram emerges completely healthy. Fina discusses what happened to Ezra, as she doesn't understand why they chose her out of millions of great people. Soon the resurrected individuals see high walls of a settlement in the distance, but on their way, skin riders with glowing necks catch up to them. Ezra stays behind to delay the pursuit. He manages to do so for a while until he recognizes his brother Silas among them. In the meantime, Fina and Abram reach the settlement's walls, and just when it seems they are destined to be captured, the gates open. A yellow drone neutralizes the skin riders and lets the fugitives inside. It then flies after Ezra, carrying him through the air into the settlement where there's no one around. In response to all their questions, the drone invites them to follow and shows them rows of graves where the settlers rest. Later, the yellow drone opens the doors of an abandoned military base for the people where the previous settlers lived. In the forest, skin riders capture a man who escaped from them. Silas discovers that the glowing creature they call companions has inexplicably stopped functioning in Duncan's neck and promises to fix it. The resurrected individuals learn that the settlers died from a new virus that still spreads throughout the region. The yellow drone asks them to release the sparks into a vessel with water and learns from them that the sparks can create a vaccine if people bring the ingredients found in the living lake. Fina begins to bleed from her nose, and she stays at the base while the men go to the lake. She takes on the task of repairing the damaged red drone. On their way, Ezra tries to understand how the system that brought them back to life works. The drone operates on sparks, but who controls the sparks is unknown. The men reach the lake and release the sparks into the water to collect the necessary ingredients. In the settlement, Ezra's wife Lynn suddenly appears before Fina. She explains that she worked as a nurse during the invasion and can offer help, but then disappears just as suddenly. On the lake's shore, Ezra confesses that one of the skin riders is his brother, meaning these people are also resurrected. He recalls the moment when he first saw the alien spaceship flying overhead and signaled to his brother that he was a worthless, spoiled child. Now he is determined to apologize and try to retrieve Silas. Meanwhile, a hologram of Lynn appears again to Fina, helping her repair the red drone. In the meantime, the yellow drone warns of the approaching skin riders. Ezra asks Abram to run while he himself tries to intercept his brother Silas. However, he gets surrounded and subdued. Regaining consciousness, he finds himself alone with his brother, who admits that he prohibited forcibly transforming him into a skin rider because he wants his brother to join them voluntarily. Each skin rider has a companion on their neck, which teaches the person how to behave correctly and telepathically connects them with others. Thanks to the companion, Silas is now the leader and mentor for the others, whereas in the previous world, he was nobody. Then Silas suddenly falls asleep, signaling Ezra to leave. Ezra meets Abram in the forest, to whom he explains his intention to save his brother. The men return to the lake, where the sparks have created 3 vaccine capsules for them. After consuming their doses, they bring the third one to Fina, whose condition worsens. Lynn asks the red drone to replace her image with someone dear to the girl, and Duncan appears next to Fina. Fina regains consciousness after her friends administer the vaccine. The next day, Abram finds a room that is blocked, revealing a glowing obelisk. Meanwhile, in the forest, Silas argues with Duncan about the purpose of the companion controlling the thoughts of the skin riders in the community because Silas believes it amounts to slavery. In the settlement, Abram learns to read hieroglyphs and understands that the unknown hosts offered to dig up weapons against the skin riders in the forest in exchange for more people for the settlement. Ezra goes to the forest for the excavation. Meanwhile, Silas brings Duncan to an open area where Jax conducts training fights, taunting regular people. Unexpectedly, Duncan defeats Jax. Silas stops the duel and explains that he tested his theory, revealing that humans react faster by a fraction of a second than skin riders. Currently, Duncan has a weak companion, so he makes decisions with just one brain, the human one. In contrast, skin riders with healthy companions have a signal that passes through 2 brains, the humans and the companions, causing a slight delay. The conclusion is that humans will always outperform them in combat. To gain an advantage over humans, Silas plans to perform brain surgery to reduce the signal delay. However, a working drone and a test subject are required for this. In the meantime, the yellow drone brings Ezra to the excavation site, which the skin riders immediately learn about. Ezra unearths an item that the yellow drone calls a weapon. In the settlement, Abram, upon touching the obelisk, suddenly realizes that he understands the meaning of the hieroglyphs on it. However, he doesn't yet grasp what this knowledge entails. In the forest, the yellow drone warns Ezra about the approaching skin riders. They attempt to flee, but the skin riders surround them and take the unearthed weapon. Unexpectedly, the weapon activates and kills one of the skin riders. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ezra scatters the rest and escapes. Meanwhile, Fina tries to find out from the red drone why the unknown beings are resurrecting humanity. She requests the revival of Duncan, unaware that he has already been resurrected and has become a skin rider. Ezra brings the weapon meant to eliminate skin riders to the obelisk, hoping it will help establish contact. However, he refuses to kill the innocent inhabitants until the obelisk explains who they are and what is happening. The drones controlled by the obelisk promise to resurrect Ezra's family if he obeys them in all matters. Ezra has no choice but to comply. Later that night, Fina goes to the obelisk, where she finds Ezra, who, like her, hopes for the return of loved ones. They notice that the weapon unearthed in the forest has opened. The obelisk issues new symbols, instructing Fina to go to the lake to receive new people. However, skin riders spot her on the way. As for Abram, the drone tells him about the structure of the glowing companion on the necks of the skin riders, which is tightly connected to the human brain through a crystalline structure. The weapon found in the forest destroys these crystals, eliminating the parasite. When a skin rider dies, its memory is preserved on the crystal, which is passed down to its ancestor. This is what needs to be found and destroyed. Fina sees Lynn emerging from the lake and helps her get ashore. When Jax appears on the shore, the red drone neutralizes him. The girls attempt to escape but are captured by Duncan, who seizes the red drone and fails to recognize Fina, his beloved from the past. The girls try to flee, but Lynn injures her leg and orders Fina to go to the settlement and fetch her husband. Lynn, on the other hand, falls into the hands of the skin riders, who return her to the lake. There, Jax shows how the sparks work, healing her injured leg. But suddenly a stone hits Jax's head, and an unknown little wild girl takes Lynn to her forest dwelling, providing her with shoes and food. However, it turns out the girl cannot speak. During this time, Fina reaches the base and informs Ezra about the resurrection of his wife, Lynn. Despite the yellow drone's warning that when skin riders take someone, it's forever, Ezra is determined to rescue her. Jax finds the little wild girl's home, but she has already taken Lynn away. They hide in the forest. At the same time, Ezra contemplates how to disable the force field since the obelisk prevents him from doing so, leaving him unable to leave the gates. Fina admits that she saw Duncan, who is also with the skin riders now, and he didn't recognize her. She fears the same will happen to Lynn. Meanwhile, in the forest, Jax tracks the runaways and explains that even the sparks make mistakes, resulting in flawed individuals. He is ready to destroy the little girl, but Lynn persuades him not to do it. At the same time, Silas extracts the crystal companion from the deceased skin rider's neck and instructs one of the women to take it to the ancestor. Then, they bring Lynn to him. As for Abram, while communicating with the obelisk, he suddenly surmises that he had lived in this settlement before, which is confirmed by a notebook he found with his own handwriting. Later, Fina speculates that they all have lived here before. The yellow drone confirms this fact and leads Abram to a graveyard where he shows everyone who is buried there, including Ezra's grave. It turns out that he had also been resurrected and lived in the settlement at one point. Then the yellow drone guides Abram to the next grave where he finds himself and encourages him to start a new life honorably. Fina demands that the man bind himself. He agrees but suddenly snatches a weapon from Fina and stuns the skin rider standing behind her. At the same time in the bunker, Abram is trying to find out from Yellow where the progenitor is located. However, she does not know, but Jax knows, and he heads to the bottomless lake, dives into it, and emerges in a cave. Meanwhile, Silas is trying to convince Ezra that life in his community is much better than in the bunker. Fina begins to trust Duncan and agrees with his plan. And in the camp, Lynn's escape is discovered. Duncan immediately receives a message about this from other skin riders and agrees with Fina's plan to send them on a false trail to enter the camp and save Ezra. The pursuit heads in another direction. Silas demonstrates to his brother the capabilities that a companion gives to the human body. He dips his hand into a vessel with sparks and explains that they cannot kill a companion as it goes against their principles. So if Ezra wants to kill the companion, he will have to kill the person. Fina and Duncan infiltrate the camp and seize the Skin Riders' weapons, and Jax reaches the ancestors' dwelling place. He asks them to explain how the drone works, and several human figures come out to him. Fina and Duncan find Lynn. The girl explains that after being infected by the parasite, she immediately plunged her hand into the sparks and it seems to have helped. Duncan asks the women to leave while he finds Ezra. The ancestors show Jax how the drone works. And in the bunker, Yellow confesses to Abram that not a human lies in one of the graves. Silas proves to Ezra that the obelisk is no better than a companion, as it also subjugates people. He lets slip that all of them, including his brother's wife and daughter, once lived in the settlement. Their conversation is interrupted by Duncan, who, under threat of arms, takes Ezra and leads the group to the settlement by a shortcut. But the protective barrier detecting a companion in Duncan does not let him pass, unlike Lynn. Then Fina ties his hands. But at that moment, the pursuit led by Silas bursts onto the clearing. Duncan pushes Fina behind the barrier, and they with Ezra prepare to fight. Abram runs to the obelisk, and it lets the men through on the condition that Duncan remains in the yard until they figure out how to free him from the parasite. At the same time, the ancestors express concern about Jax's hatred for humans, as they are much better carriers than Kariks, and they advise him to find a compromise. Meanwhile, Duncan confesses that his companion is still weak, but he is gaining strength. He remembers the settlers and confirms that Kylie is alive. Sparks rejuvenate people in the prime of life, but children at the age of their actual death. He also lost a wife and a child, and it was Fina, although the woman does not remember this. Abram explains that they are another generation of the revived. The first one lies in the graves, and they are them too. Jax reprograms the red drone, refusing everything human that was in its memory. Fina unties her husband, but when she falls asleep, Duncan's companion receives a signal from Silas, and he heads to the bunker. There, Abram confesses to Ezra that the drone showed him the memory of another woman he saw a year before the invasion. It feels like someone knew about the invasion and offered people help. He wants to consult with Yellow, but she is nowhere to be found. This happens because Duncan is just locking the drone behind one of the panels. Then he attacks Abram, knocks him out, and heads to the obelisk, despite his human side resisting it. He screams in frustration and Ezra hears him. He runs to him, but Duncan closes the doors and enters symbols that deactivate the force field. Realizing this, Ezra rushes to Fina and they manage to barricade the bunker doors. Duncan's companion comes out in the open and confesses that all this was done for the sake of the weapon he hid. He is ready to reveal where Kylie is now if they hand over the bunker to the Skin Riders. The man is tied up. Outside, the sounds of banging are heard, Skin Riders trying to break down the door. Through Duncan, Silas offers to hand over the bunker. Then he will say where Ezra's daughter is now, because someone from the first settlement managed to avoid death from disease. A debate ensues, resulting in a decision to deactivate the parasite using Lynn's medical knowledge. Jax returns. He expresses his dissatisfaction to Silas, as he could have infected Ezra long ago, but lets him go. Silas cuts off the conversation and orders to continue working on the drone. At this time in the bunker, Lynn tries to figure out how the companion works, and it confesses that it can cause great pain to its master. Ezra and Abram conclude that the settlement existed for at least 10 years, and there must be survivors, otherwise, who buried the fallen. Moreover, Yellow said that a drone is buried in one of the graves. At that moment, the knocking at the door resumes. Ezra remembers that there is electricity in the bunker. Fina digests the cable, and a strong electric shock destroys one of the Skin Riders. At the same time, Abram finds Yellow. Simultaneously, people realize that Duncan is acting as a transmitter, and they move him to another room. As they part, Ezra asks to tell his brother that he loves and believes in him. This message puzzles Silas. Yellow scans Duncan and discovers that the parasite has affected all human organs, and even the sparks cannot save him. Abram tries to get answers from the obelisk. Moreover, Yellow said that Duncan was given access codes, but by whom? The man again remembers that woman in the hospital. She had a drone, sparks, and symbols of knowledge on her bracelet, so something was known before the invasion. At Ezra's request, Yellow shows the image of the woman, and he recognizes his mother, Eleanor. Meanwhile, Silas prepares to continue breaking down the doors, but something leads him to the cemetery. Jax, following him, reminds him that he is not human and he should not care about the graves, so he intends to start silencing personalities from him. Silas is arrested. At this time in the bunker, Yellow confesses that Eleanor was one of the initiators of the revival of the human race. Duncan is not lying. Kylie was in the settlement, and only he can say where the survivors are now. Duncan's companion is knocked out with a tranquilizer, and the man is tied to a table. While the parasite sleeps, the man comes to and points on the map the direction the survivors went. He advises finding the wild girl and wakes up. After which, Yellow finds the weapon he had hidden earlier. The people notice the silence outside and, opening the doors, kill the sentinels left by the skin riders. Making sure that there is no one else in the yard, Ezra and Lynn say goodbye to their friends and set out to find Kylie. Jax activates the drone, intending to remove the human personality from Silas, and learns about the presence of Ezra and Lynn in the forest. He sends the skin riders to follow the pair. Fina comes to Duncan and admits that she is ready to kill him to free her loved one. However, Yellow knocks him out. The man regains consciousness in the cemetery and is relieved, thinking that Fina could not bring herself to harm him. In fact, Yellow has injected a beacon into his body, and now people can track his path. At this time, Ezra and Lynn find the wild girl and ask her to guide them to Kylie. Silas regains consciousness when the red drone informs him that he did the opposite, preserved his personality, and suppressed the parasite's capabilities. At the same time, Ezra and Lynn notice they are being followed and try to evade the skin riders. However, arrows fly from the rocks, the skin riders perish, and the survivors approach the people. Meanwhile, in the camp, Jax leaves Duncan on guard while he and his people follow Ezra and Lynn. They are then scanned for safety, and upon confirmation, the settlement leader Rowan leads them into the camp. She warns them that they do not truly know their daughter. They only remember her up to the age of 6, and they are merely copies of those who lived in the settlement. Abram and Fina dig up a broken drone from the grave, hoping to retrieve data from its memory. Rowan brings Ezra and Lynn to the hidden camp in the mountain caves. Noticing the strange expressions on people's faces, she explains that they both died defending the previous camp from an attack. If it weren't for Lynn, no one would have survived. Silas killed the woman. Fina connects Yellow to the memory of the broken drone, and she promises to show the events of the past. At the camp, Ezra and Lynn's adult daughter arrives. Although she understands what they feel, she refuses to recognize them as her parents. Red notices that Silas is experiencing severe pain. He flies to Duncan, and at that moment in the camp, a bloody Justin appears, who orders him to take the rest of the people and rush to the place where they were ambushed. He carries out the order, and Jax disappears because it was a hologram created by Red. Silas escapes. The real Jax finds the ambush site and orders a search of the rocks. In the bunker, Yellow transports Fina and Abram into a virtual reality of the past settlement, where people go about their daily activities. Jax enters the gates and explains that Silas developed a growth on his neck, after which he attacked his friends. All this happened near the old Karrick ship. Returning to their reality, the people realize that this was the first case of companion infection. Yellow explains that the parasites create a structure similar to fungal spores. Silas likely inhaled them. The parasites themselves were brought by the Karricks, who were their carriers before humans. Meanwhile, a boy from the survivors, Thomas, carelessly falls into the hands of Justin. Silas begins to experience severe pain. Red tries to alleviate his condition and notices Duncan rushing towards the bunker. Apparently, he has discovered his escape and wants to detain Silas. Red leads him another way. At the same time, Thomas learns that he has been infected with the parasite. At the camp, his absence is noticed. Rowan calls a council and Ezra advises them to flee. If Thomas reveals the camp, they will not survive. Yellow shows how Abram proposed to create a virus capable of killing the parasite, although the idea itself belongs to the obelisk. People heatedly discuss this proposal, and many disagree. Lynn suggests splitting up. Those who take the virus should stay in the bunker, as they will be weakened. Rowan speaks against it. Abram realizes that he was the cause of the remaining deaths. In the caves, Ezra urges everyone to leave while he defends them. At this time, Silas reaches the bunker and sees Duncan sitting by a campfire. He lures him into the workshop and locks him in there. Abram is overwhelmed with guilt, runs to the obelisk, and voices his accusations. Suddenly, it creates the image of a second Abram, who says that on the other side of the obelisk are creators who sincerely believed they were saving the settlement. The virus just turned out to be slower than the parasite cells. The second Abram disappears as voices of Ezra and Lynn come from behind the doors. Fina opens the doors, and friends push Silas inside. They immediately disappear as they were holograms created by Red. Silas asks to be heard. The drone supports this request and reports that they cannot destroy the ancestor without Silas. At this point, the boy loses consciousness and they bring him inside. Ezra, Lynn, and the young archers set up an ambush, but Thomas appears, shoots at them, and wounds Kylie's fiancé, Nico. Ezra kills the boy, and upon examining, finds a parasite. Lifting his arrow, he realizes there is something on its tip. At that moment, Jax appears with his people and calls them to battle. Red puts Silas into a coma. Meanwhile, Lynn and Kylie bring the injured Nico inside. Justin orders his man to watch the backup entrance to the cave. Lynn starts treating Nico, but the worst part is that the arrow tip might have a parasite larva. The boy then demands to be killed, as Lynn herself set such rules. Duncan tries to call any of the skin riders for help, and Yellow explains to Fina and Abram that the parasite is killing Silas so that he cannot reveal the way to the progenitor. Then Red admits that he can link the minds of Abram and Silas, which might help reveal the secret. At this time, Kylie decides to help her father patrol. The girl recalls the past and calls Jax his best friend, which greatly surprises Ezra. And his urge to kill arises because the parasites are very afraid that the human inside might take over if he remembers his attachments. Father and daughter return to the cave, and Ezra proposes that his wife, daughter, and Nico take another road while he guards them. After heated arguments, they head to the second exit. Abram enters Silas's mind and finds himself in a church. It turns out that the boy's mind considers the church a sanctuary. Abram admits that Silas will no longer come to himself, and he himself describes the way to the lake of the progenitor. The parasites are interconnected precisely through it. It is the source of their energy, strength, and knowledge. Silas knows for sure humanity will not survive if the lake does not disappear. Ezra resorts to trickery, and Kylie kills a lurking skin rider. The father bids farewell to everyone and stays in the cave. At the same time, Abram and Fina develop a plan to destroy the progenitor. Yellow explains that the weapon consists of 3 parts. 2 of these are standalone weapons, capable of operating independently of each other. However, the top part is dangerous for humans themselves, so it is discarded. Only the lower part remains, which destroys the progenitor. But this part will not work without the middle, where a human personality must be placed. But the progenitor has studied all the skin riders in this world, so the chances of getting into it are slim. And then Abram realizes why Silas was needed. Later, Fina reflects on her promise to Duncan to kill him and free him from the parasite. Then, Yellow admits that her husband is in the workshop in the yard. The woman arms herself and heads to the yard, but just as she is ready to open the door to the workshop, a skin rider enters the yard and releases Duncan. Fina tries to stop the men, but Duncan reminds her that she cannot kill him and leaves. At this time, Abram comes to Silas again and explains that they need his help. Jax decides to attack, realizing that Ezra is the only defender of the camp. He orders his men to engage him while he himself follows the trail of Lynn, Kylie, and Nico. Nico is losing strength, and Lynn decides to make a stretcher, although the boy asks to just leave him. And Ezra sets up an ambush, and one by one eliminates the skin riders, then follows the trail of his wife. Nico transforms and grabs Lynn by the throat. He is ready to kill the woman, but Kylie interferes. The boy's companion admits that the girl is very dear to him, but he cannot indulge the carrier's weaknesses, and when Nico raises his sword, Kylie shoots him. Ezra catches up with them, not knowing that Jax is monitoring their reunion, but he receives a message about Silas's betrayal, and Jax leaves. Silas asks Abram to wait for his death, take his crystal, and insert it into the weapon. Then he will be in the middle part and can help. Abram does not fully understand how it works, but thanks Silas. They say goodbye. Abram comes to his senses when Silas dies, and Jax catches up with Duncan and his men by the lake. After a dispute, he orders everyone to stay in ambush, and he and Duncan will dive to the progenitor. Meanwhile, Lynn and Ezra bury Nico and console their daughter. Simultaneously, Fina and Abram bury Silas. Later, the groups meet, unaware that a black drone is watching them, which takes off above the earth and heads for a spacecraft. Abram tells Ezra everything that happened with his brother and the plan to destroy the progenitor, but he does not want to endanger his family. Yellow vaccinates Kylie, explaining that the vaccine was made by Sparks. The girl tells Fina that Duncan became a skin rider after her death, and no one knows how it happened. At the same time, Abram admits that he no longer believes in the obelisk, but he believes in Silas and is ready to do everything to destroy the progenitor. He tells Ezra about the weapons operation. A part of Silas will guide them inside, but what to do next, he doesn't know. Ezra laughs at such a plan, and his daughter hears this. Abram and Phina try to convince Ezra that this is why they were resurrected. Otherwise, humanity is doomed. But they cannot persuade him. Then Abram and Phina leave together. Ezra is tormented by guilt, although Lynn tries to remind him of his duty to his family. At this time, Kylie is reviewing the map to the progenitor's lake and secretly leaves the bunker. Red informs the parents that he cannot find the girl, and they, realizing where she has gone, rush after her. Meanwhile, Kylie catches up with Phina and Abram, and later Ezra and Lynn appear. Thus they all come together again. But at the lake itself, they fall into an ambush by the Skin Riders. A battle ensues in which the group of survivors wins, but Abram is seriously wounded. However, Kylie has Sparks with her, and she suggests releasing them into the lake. As they start doing this, Duncan emerges from the water and shoots Lynn and Kylie. Phina, under the cover of a shield, rushes to him, and they both disappear under the water. Ezra releases the Sparks and brings the wounded into the water. Then a wounded Phina emerges, saying she couldn't overcome Duncan. Ezra dives and finds a wounded Duncan, who has reverted to his true self before death. He apologizes and loses consciousness, and Ezra sees in front of him a glowing something with crystals and fits the lower part of the weapon onto one of them. Then he inserts Silas's little crystal into the middle part of the weapon and looks for the place where it needs to be placed. But then Jax appears. He has always hated his carrier and all humans, and he will not let the progenitor be destroyed. The men engage in combat, and just as Jax is about to win, the revived Duncan attacks him. Ezra finds the right crystal and fits the middle part of the weapon onto it, and suddenly finds himself in a room where he is met by Silas. The brother explains that they are inside the progenitor, and only he could create this home in this place. He is a Trojan horse from which destruction will enter the progenitor. Ezra picks up the box with the symbol of knowledge from his mother and realizes that it is a detonator. The brother says goodbye to him, and when Jax appears, they activate the bomb. Ezra finds himself in the cave where the progenitor is destroyed, to Jax's great sorrow. The man emerges and finds his loved ones healed. Their elation is washed by a black drone, which again heads to the spaceship, where it is met by Eleanor and Duncan. They realize that the deed is done and humanity has a chance. Despite some illogicality, the story is quite extraordinary. It's not about battles with aliens, as the Kariks are only briefly shown once in a flashback, and not about humans' attempts to cunningly escape the dictate of their rule. At the heart is the question of the value of a person, the preservation of which can lead to peace and the rebuilding of civilization. The spaceship is on a mission to Titan, one of Saturn's moons. Astronaut John wakes up in the hibernation capsule. He feels weak after the long sleep. The drugs have many side effects and John needs some time to recover. He is greeted by the ship's captain, Franks. The captain orders John to take a shower and then come up to the bridge to discuss the next steps. Besides Captain Franks, John is met by his colleague Nash. Together the men watch a message from the Mission Control Center and receive new instructions. They are to conduct routine equipment checks and prepare for gravitational acceleration. John tries to pull himself together, but this time he feels worse. He struggles to eat and confesses to Nash that he can't remember the last name of Zoe, his girlfriend. By evening, John manages to check all the equipment. He records a response message to Mission Control, reports the situation, and prepares for another hibernation cycle, which will last 3 more months. A special substance is injected into the astronaut's bloodstream, and his eyes slowly close. Memories from the past wash over him, and for the next 3 months, he is deep in sleep. The awakening process is routine, with John experiencing the usual symptoms as he waits for his body to recover. After a hearty meal, the astronaut spends some time on the exercise bike, preparing for work, but unexpectedly he hears a familiar voice. It seems like Zoe's voice came from somewhere nearby. John steps into the corridor and walks through the empty spaceship. No one else has woken up from deep sleep yet, and John feels uneasy. His fear intensifies when part of the ship's hull above him starts to come loose. John tries to figure out what's wrong, but a piece of metal breaks off and knocks him unconscious. Captain Franks and Nash lay their injured colleague down and provide medical assistance. As soon as John feels better, the captain orders him to go to the technical compartment and figure out what caused the malfunction. Under the hull, John finds significant damage and a strange giant dent, but the footage Nash reviews from the cameras provides no answers. No objects approached the ship in the past few hours. Moreover, the dent hasn't caused any serious problems. All systems are still functioning normally. Captain Franks leaves his subordinates and orders them to report the situation to Earth. He himself heads to the site of the damage for another inspection. Nash tries to convince the captain to abort the mission and return to Earth, but Franks refuses to break protocol. There's no serious reason to do so, as all systems are still operating smoothly. The astronauts gather to make a joint decision, but the conflict only escalates. Nash starts panicking, insisting that continuing the mission is too dangerous, but the captain remains firm. Unless new orders come from Mission Control, they will continue toward Titan. Nash then tries to persuade John to act together. He's convinced the system will eventually fail, and by then, they won't have the chance to save themselves and return to Earth. Their conversation is interrupted by the captain, who calls them to the bridge. He admits that he overheard everything Nash said and doesn't appreciate his attempts to stir up panic. Franks tries to calm Nash down, reminding him of the consequences they'll face for disobeying orders and advising them to focus on their duties. Despite the captain's orders, Nash continues to urge John. He asks him to set the hibernation cycle for 89 days instead of 90 so they can wake up earlier than the captain and reverse course back to Earth. John doesn't like his friend's idea and doesn't want to be part of a mutiny, but when Nash tells him about another ship destroyed by poor leadership decisions, John agrees to think it over and give an answer after they wake up. John falls asleep again, recalling happy moments with Zoe, but this time the cycle is much shorter than usual. Nash demands an answer from his friend so they can quickly turn the ship around and head for Earth, but John remains uncertain. He realizes that his mind is clouded, and making important decisions in this state isn't wise. Jupiter appears outside the window, strengthening John's doubts. They are so close to their destination. This drives Nash over the edge, and a loud argument breaks out between the men. Captain Franks watches the whole scene. Having learned of his subordinates' plans, he also altered his sleep schedule and woke up earlier to prevent the mutineers from disrupting the mission. Franks sends Nash to check the systems again to make sure everything is in order. While the saboteur is gone, the captain invites John for a drink to gauge the astronaut's mood. The commander assures John that he'll cancel the mission if it's necessary, but for now they must stick together and follow orders. Nash's derailed plans push him to the brink of insanity. He causes a scene and Franks decides to relieve him of his duties and proceed with acceleration without him. John tries to stay out of the conflict and pretends that everything is fine, but the breach in the hull continues to trouble him, and he often has nightmares where it pulls him into the vacuum of space. Despite his concerns, John ignores Nash's pleas and heads to the bridge to prepare for the acceleration. The team gets ready to approach Jupiter. John sets the coordinates and sequentially activates the powerful engines that will take them to Titan. The acceleration is successful, and the ship enters the orbit that will guide them to Titan. But Nash still believes it's a serious mistake. John isn't entirely sure they made the right choice either, but he tries to keep himself busy to avoid dwelling on it. He decides to check the equipment again, and something strange happens. One of the radios transmits an unknown signal. The crew tries to come up with an explanation, both insisting that John must have accidentally pressed a button. To end the discussion, Franks orders the astronauts to prepare for another hibernation cycle. This time, exiting hibernation becomes a real challenge. John collapses to the floor, completely drained. He tries to recover, but while his body regains strength, his mind suffers greatly. He keeps seeing visions of Zoe everywhere. Captain Franks notices his subordinate's strange condition. He tells John to get a grip and realize that it's all just his imagination. Zoe is not, and cannot be, on the ship. Nash discovers the first signs of trouble. The reactor's power output begins to rise. He's not sure if it's connected to the hull breach, but if it continues, the ship's engine might fail. Nash again urges his friend to listen to him and turn the ship around. He reminds John of Zoe, saying that if they don't return now, she'll quickly find a new boyfriend. Captain Franks overhears the men's conversation once again. He summons them to the bridge for a serious talk. Someone, using Nash's password, deliberately lowered the engine's power to stop the ship. The commander won't tolerate Nash's antics any longer. This time he draws his sidearm to show the mutineer who's in charge on the ship. Franks orders the astronauts to return to their hibernation capsules to prevent any further sabotage, but as John's body starts receiving the drug, he sees what the captain is doing to his colleague. He doesn't have time to stop the crime. His eyes close. Weeks later, when the sleep cycle ends, John tries to figure out if it really happened or if it was just a dream. He steps into the corridor, but none of his colleagues are around. Franks appears suddenly. He assures John that Nash is fine but will remain in hibernation until the mission is over. The captain asks John not to complicate things and behave normally. They need to complete the mission and reach Titan, but if necessary, he'll use his sidearm to prevent further insubordination. To help John relax, Franks tells him the truth about the other ships Nash mentioned. He swears the madman distorted the facts, and in that case the captain wasn't at fault. The crew harmed themselves. John reluctantly admits he was wrong and agrees to continue working together. The captain tasks him with inspecting the equipment and re-establishing contact with mission control on Earth. While working, John's arm goes numb, and he tries to examine it himself, but for a moment it seems like the limb swells and turns into a monstrous hand. As soon as the vision disappears, John hears Zoe's voice again, but he realizes this is also a hallucination and doesn't respond to the call. Instead, John decides to discuss the future plans with the captain, but Franks unexpectedly starts talking about John's relationship with his girlfriend. The commander assures him that their romance wasn't real. It was orchestrated to convince John to join the mission. The unpleasant conversation unsettles John, and he heads to the workshop to focus on his tasks. Unpleasant thoughts and memories prevent John from concentrating, but suddenly the radio crackles, and he hears the dispatcher's voice. The astronaut tries to report what's happening, but the connection keeps cutting out, and he can't hear a response. Franks summons John to the bridge. He demands to know what John was doing, and upon hearing about the conversation with Houston, the captain insists it was another hallucination. The captain orders John to return to his capsule and go back to sleep, but this time John's nerves snap. He demands that Franks wake Nash up and prove that his friend is okay. Taking advantage of a moment, Franks attacks John and tries to force him into the capsule, but John manages to break free. A fight breaks out between the two men. John is stronger, but he can't win the battle with his mind as easily as with the captain. John reaches the central computer to find out which chamber Nash is in and if he's alive. While entering the request, he has to fend off Franks, but finally, the computer starts searching for the astronaut. The answer John receives leaves him in shock. The program confirms that Nash is alive and on the bridge, just like John and Franks, because all three names belong to the same person, Captain John Franks Nash. John realizes that he's been alone on the ship the entire time. His companions were figments of his imagination caused by the repeated use of hibernation drugs. John loses his last bit of strength and doesn't know what to do next. He returns to the workshop, holding the service pistol. The astronaut tries to contact mission control again, but for a long time the radios remain silent. Finally, one of the radios turns on, and John hears Zoe's voice. She says she's at the ground control center and was invited to speak to him. Zoe confirms John's version. The hibernation drugs were too strong, causing his mind to become confused. But that's not the worst part. The girl tells the astronaut that there's no spaceship. All this time he's been part of a different experiment in deep underground. The planets and stars he saw through the window were just a simulation, as was the sensation of flying. But the impact was real. An earthquake hit the surface, partially collapsing the tunnel. Zoe asks her fiancé to gather his strength and help them rescue him. To do that, John needs to depressurize the cargo bay and leave the ship. She assures him that outside, there's an underground corridor leading to the surface. Captain Franks reappears behind John, trying to stop him. He claims that Zoe's voice is just another hallucination, and the story about underground tunnels and earthquakes is a fantasy his mind made up to explain the situation. Franks tells John that if he depressurizes the cargo bay, all that awaits outside is the vacuum of space, which will pull him out and end his life. John hesitates briefly, but Zoe's voice gives him strength. He doesn't listen to the captain and opens the airlock. At first it seems like Zoe was right. John finds himself in a shaft and hears her voice nearby. He walks toward the light, hoping to soon reach the surface, but space engulfs the astronaut's body and carries him into the infinite void. Or was that a hallucination too? That's how the movie ends. The next day, Faraday records a message to his wife. He explains that on Earth, they would be called a family, and their children would be real children and not dolls. It seems as though he's beginning to understand what emotions are. Drones on Antea have no right to choose, but on Earth, the range of choices is astounding. There can be dozens of varieties of just coffee. Even children can choose. Humans create rituals out of simple actions. For example, the ritual of family dining or talking to God. And during meals, people share their day's events. They also experience a sense of joy which Faraday wishes to experience with his wife. Each generation here produces a handful of great minds. Justin is one of them. The number of emotions experienced by people in a day is absurd. And everyone around Faraday lives in fear of some kind. The fear of failure leads Clay to meet with Finch. After a tough conversation, he still pleads for another week, as Faraday was almost done building the device. Faraday then continues to explain that on Earth, everyone has their own self, but on Antea, they're born either as knowers or drones, but here everyone creates themselves. And people also believe in something higher, that is, in God. One day, Josiah suddenly cuts off a conversation about synthesis and leaves the table, and this marks the beginning of his changes. Then a man plays a jazz record explaining what it is and how it originated. While improvisation was inexplicable, Faraday tries to explain it to his wife. Meanwhile, Elizabeth tells Clay that the signal in the tornado came from somewhere in Southeast Asia. Also, the stewardess on the plane, Faraday, was posted about it afterwards. After seeing Clay off, Elizabeth calls someone on the phone and asks for a meeting. At this time, Eddie informs his brother about the desire of oil magnate Thorne to buy half of the Origin Corporation. In London, Josiah notices a music store. He then picks up a guitar and starts playing, astonishing the salesman, but suddenly the man faints. Justin finds him in the hospital, and although doctors were sure everything was fine, Faraday tells how Josiah was born in the Bahamas and turned his genius to music in his youth. But his wife left him after their daughter was born, and the alien confesses that she shared his DNA with the old man, which is now rewriting Josiah's human genome, and what he will turn into is unknown. Josiah then leaves the house and goes to a bridge. There he finds a wasp nest and stares at it for a long time, and upon returning home, starts writing an endless equation. The doctor arrives and announces that his blood oxygen level is elevated. Justin blames everything on Faraday, but suddenly, Faraday realizes that Josiah translated his daughter's equation into sound frequencies and wrote a song, the key to the synthesis process. He sets up a keyboard instrument in front of the device and asks Josiah to play its melody. Well, the man begins to play, and gradually, by changing frequencies and tempo, he manages to activate the device. Faraday joins him, and everything works out. That night, Elizabeth takes Josiah's medical chart from the doctor and reports of Clay about Faraday's successful experiment. Looking at the test results, she figures out that Newton is in Cambodia, where a cement bunker can be seen in the middle of the jungle. Clay informs Finch about this, and she forbids him to go there. But the agent sends a special force team to Cambodia. The soldiers enter the building, which turns out to be empty. But inside they find unknown plants whose dust kills them. Clay watches this in horror through a mirror screen. Meanwhile, Molly asks her family to help her with an assignment and create a family tree. But they have no photos, so Faraday draws a very similar family portrait to which Molly asks to add him. At this time, Hutch and Eddie attend the presentation of the new oncology center of the Magni, born because Eddie is obsessed with the idea of using it to protect against the CIA. Clay's people try to understand what happened in the bunker of Cambodia, and Elizabeth finds power lines laid out of the bunker, but can't yet track exactly where. Josiah notices that the fingerprints are disappearing from his fingers, and he hears synapses forming in his brain, and realizes that he's becoming an Anthean. At Eddie's estates, a meeting begins attended by Clay. Justin realizes that he is not a scientist at all and starts suspecting that something is not right. She doesn't want Faraday to fall into the hands of those who tore Newton apart. And later, Finch reprimands Clay for the soldiers' deaths and orders him to fly to Washington. Realizing that their work could be blocked by the CIA, Justin leaves, and Faraday activates the system, calling Newton to start asking questions. He doesn't understand why the launch was delayed, as it's fatal for Antea. Newton, impressed with his rebirth, advises learning to lie. To outsmart the CIA, he must make himself a legend, as Fame could not be killed. Newton disconnects, and Elizabeth, rushing into the laboratory, fails to see anything. Thinking it over, Faraday suggests making their work public, as the CIA loves silence. Hutch arranges a meeting with a journalist friend, and Faraday talks about a new energy source and the CIA's threat to freeze the project. Eddie learns that a man named Clay emerged from a witness protection program. Clay at the moment tries to explain himself to a committee and shows an order signed by Finch and talks about the tape of Newton's interrogation. The woman is shocked, as she did not expect much treachery from her protege. Clay gets a permission to continue the case. Elizabeth shows Justin camera footage from Cambodia, but Newton was not there, even though the bunker was sending a signal to space. Apparently, the alien was talking to his people and warns that Clay will never allow the machine to be taken unless they catch Newton. Justin tells Faraday about the soldiers' deaths, but he doesn't believe that Newton could have killed people. That night, Clay comes to Eddie and tells her that he and his mother came to America from Russia, but the woman turned out to be a terrorist. She blew up the building where she worked, abandoning her son to fate. That's when Finch found and adopted him, and he doesn't know where his real mom is now. And he destroyed his foster mother today, and meanwhile, Faraday also finds the Cambodian recordings and hears Newton's signal to Antea. He admits to Justin that Newton deceived everyone, and he never intended to return home because he wanted to bring the Antheans here. But he, Faraday, promises to do everything to save Earth. Newton transmits the signals intercepted by the CIA, but they cannot decrypt them. Justin is sure that the machine will still be taken, so she asks her friend to take Molly away. They then rush to the laboratory, and Elizabeth immediately reports this to Clay. Faraday dismantles the machine, gives the core to Justin, orders her and Josiah to leave, and stays in the laboratory. The pair barely manage to avoid Clay and his henchmen, and agents burst into the laboratory where they are met by Faraday. But after driving away, Justin decides to return for the alien, and in the laboratory, Faraday, seeing the agents, detonates a gas cylinder. Later, a stunned Clay sees Josiah carrying Faraday away, but is unable to stop it. Faraday regains consciousness and names Mary's phone number. Justin calls her and drives to the monastery. The sister immediately orders the preparation of the operating room and instructs to hide the device. It turns out that Faraday lost a lot of blood, but first the bullet must be removed. When Mary cuts the skin, strange tentacles jump out of the alien's body, frightening the sisters. But Mary assures them that he is an angel. Hutch receives an offer to sell his part of Origin for a large sum. Although he doesn't understand why Magnate Thorne would want a blown-up laboratory, he agrees. In the monastery, Mary sets up women on lookout posts, and Josiah announces that he's ready to give his blood to Faraday, convincing the sisters that he's a Nephilim, half angel, half human. Clay's people search Justin's house, and Elizabeth finds a clue but reports it to her mysterious contacts. At the time in the monastery, Mary confesses to Justin that she got Newton addicted to alcohol, thus ruining his life. Therefore, she asked Justin to do everything to save Faraday as she loves him, although she doesn't yet realize it. In the meantime, Clay's assistant traces a call from Justin and the agents and learns their location. Mary begins a blood transfusion operation from Josiah to Faraday. Clay's agents rush to the monastery, while Elizabeth warns someone that the alien has been found. Meanwhile, to buy time to complete the operation, the sisters and Mary arm themselves and fend off against the agents. A shootout begins, and Clay demands the surrender of the alien, but the sisters stand their ground. However, they run out of bullets and Mary orders everyone to run while she kneels at the altar. There, Clay finds her and the woman asks him to say his real name, and he admits that he is Ivan. But the nun corrects him, as his real name is Judas, and the agent shoots her. Hearing the shot, Justin goes into the room and encounters Clay. He orders Faraday, Justin, and the device to be taken, leaving the old man behind. Mary regains consciousness and crawls to the operating room with her last strength. She reaches Josiah's hand and dies happily. Justin's friend and Molly fall into the hands of unknown people. At the same time, Elizabeth warns Clay that they don't have the algorithm to activate the core, and he reports that he has interrogation experience. The alien and Justin are brought to a demolished laboratory and tied to chairs. Seeing Justin being beaten, Faraday confesses that the recorded signal from the tornado is an order for the remaining Antaeans to prepare for flight to Earth. Clay takes Justin to another room and orders Elizabeth to guard while he deals with Faraday. The agents start torturing and demanding to confess when and how the aliens will arrive. Elizabeth asks Justin for the algorithm, but Justin remembers how the girl betrayed her family. She allowed Clay to kill in the monastery, so how is she any better than him? Clay continues the torture, but it had no effect on the alien. And instead, Faraday manages to enrage Clay, claiming that it was Finch who used him and not the other way around. The agent orders water torture, but it turns out to be a gift for Faraday as he loves the water. Then Elizabeth remembers about the X-ray, and it truly causes Faraday pain, and he starts screaming, which Justin hears. Suddenly, Watt appears before Faraday and advises him to make something up for Clay. Elizabeth notices this and realizes that the alien is losing his mind. Watt, meanwhile, suggests to Faraday that Clay had two families. The alien starts seeing that one family abandoned the boy, and the other he betrayed himself. This turns out to be the boy's eternal pain, and Clay gets angry and shoots Faraday in the leg. Visions of Antea, his family, and the flight flash before the alien, and he gives Clay a vision about the imminent arrival of a ship prepared by Newton. The synthesis machine is the ship's engine, but without Faraday it won't work, and the alien offers Clay to play Russian roulette. And this is because he can entrust synthesis only to someone who won't hesitate to sacrifice themselves for progress. Faraday tells Clay about his biological mother's dossier, which he found on the internet. He'll say where she is if Clay loads a bullet, spins the chamber, and pulls the trigger. The agent will have a chance to ask 5 questions, and if he survives, Faraday will give him the synthesis. The agent agrees to the terms, and they start the game of Russian roulette. Clay asks about the world of Antea. Faraday tells, and the agent pulls the trigger, and he survives. Finally, they get to the main question for Clay about his mother, and the alien confesses that everything with his biological mother was planned and executed by Finch. She was part of a team working on Newton, and she deliberately deprived the boy of his family and took away his name. Clay, driven mad, points the gun at Faraday, but Elizabeth, who enters, shoots first, killing the agent, and she contacts someone and reports that she has Faraday and Justin, and soon people from oil magnate Thorne arrive at the bunker. Molly has been with them for a long time and is safe, and Josiah is also alive, but his illness has returned. All of them are now under Thorne's protection as he sees the future in synthesis. The people are taken to meet the magnate, and in a vine-covered cave where Buddhist monks sit on the floor, they meet Newton. Faraday recalls how on Antea the knowers took seeds from him that was supposed to sprout on Earth. In the present, Faraday expresses outrage over his dissection, but Newton draws attention to the surrounding vegetation. He had given the monks Antea seeds in exchange for shelter and permission to observe their prayers. This area is a complete magnetic anomaly, which is why satellites see nothing and the CIA cannot find him. Therefore, no one could spot the huge spaceship that Newton built. He shows the ship to Faraday, who realizes that only the knowers should come to Earth. Faraday's shocked because it was the knowers who made all the decisions that led to Antaea's demise. And the drones just followed their orders. But now it's the knowers who must perish. Justin also realizes that after the arrival of the knowers, humans will become drones, and after all, the reborn Josiah stopped experiencing emotions and began to prioritize efficiency over love. Newton insists that only the merging of races will give Earth a chance to survive, but Justin is adamantly against it. She refuses to unlock the device algorithm, which she altered before fleeing the laboratory. She leaves and Newton forces his student to learn the algorithm, as he's destined to be the one who will greet the aliens on Earth and prevent their killing. This is because he will become a legend after becoming the head of the Origin Corporation. Faraday demands to take his family on the ship, but Newton advises forgetting about them and staying Justin. He doesn't want to see drones on Earth. Faraday was wrongly classified as a servant because he always asks questions. Faraday finds Justin, who's disappointed in him, and demands to be taken home, but he couldn't do that until he learns the algorithm. He confesses that it was she and her family who taught him to love. Justin gives in and goes home, and they again live in their old house. Josiah's illness has returned, and the woman is disappointed, but her father reminds her of faith, which will help them endure everything. 3 months later, Elizabeth visits Justin, and the woman confesses that she betrayed them for money. But now the CIA will take revenge on her and sooner or later kill her. But before that, they will take Faraday, and Elizabeth gives her cross to Justin and asks her for forgiveness, and Justin reveals to her Thorne's identity. Later, she accidentally finds Faraday's device, which alerts her to an approaching tornado. Justin follows its directions and enters the hurricane's eye. Meanwhile, news reports broadcast a man ready to share a new type of energy with the world. In the evening, in a huge theater, Faraday appears on stage and he begins to talk about everything that happened. Simultaneously, agents head to Justin and Hutch's home. At the theater, a sniper targets Faraday, but he pulls out the synthesis box, forcing the sniper to stop. Faraday is brought to Finch, and he refuses to answer until he sees Justin and Hutch. Although Finch is sure that she is one, the couple is brought in. Then Faraday reminds them that the controlling stake in the new enterprise now belongs to Justin and Hutch, and without their consent, no one can do anything with the device. Faraday will fly to Antaea and bring back the remaining people of his planet to Earth. Finch threatens all three with imprisonment, and in response, Faraday announces that in 12 hours, the blueprints for quantum synthesis will appear on the internet, and people will get it for free, and the USA will no longer be the world's owner. Finch threatens Justin's family, but Justin reminds her that against the system is the entire population of Earth, and now the CIA will have to worry about their safety. Later, Faraday comes to Newton, who admits that he's proud of him. Later, Faraday visits Josiah to return his hat and thank him for showing him his paternal love. He says goodbye to Molly, teaching her Antaean gestures, and she gives him a logo figurine. The hardest moment for him arrives saying goodbye to Justin, and he will bring his family there, although they might not recognize him now. But the woman is sure that everything will be as it should be. Faraday prepares for departure, while Molly and Justin planned Antaea's siege near their house. And at night, they watch the launch from a distant star. At times very naive, at times deep and subtle, with philosophy, with reflections on family values, but overall, lovers of science fiction should really enjoy it. In a small provincial town in Pennsylvania, life flows peacefully and calmly. Milton Robinson, a 79-year-old widower and one of its citizens, leads the life of a simple retiree. He regularly attends town council meetings where he always raises the same issues about changing the town's slogan and installing an additional pedestrian crosswalk near his home. One summer morning after presenting his proposals as usual, Milton heads home. He spends his day with his daily chores, has dinner, and goes to bed. In the morning, he waters his azaleas and feeds the birds. Later, his adult daughter Denise comes to help him with his monthly bills. There's no news from his elder son Tim, as he lives far away and rarely calls. After finishing their business, Denise goes to the restroom and finds a jar of peas there. She's concerned about her father's well-being, and even though Milton assures her he's fine, she suggests he see a neurologist for a checkup. After all, the man is quite old, and forgetfulness could be a sign of approaching dementia. However, Milton vehemently opposes seeing any doctors. Denise goes to work, leaving the old man alone with his beloved detective shows and a solitary dinner. One night he suddenly hears a commotion in his backyard, and going outside, he sees a flying saucer that has landed awkwardly. Milton calls the rescue service, but they remind him that joking with such a serious organization is a matter for the authorities. They no longer answer his calls, so he dials Denise's number, but she is unavailable. After a restless night, he heads to the town council meeting, where as always he talks about the slogan and the crosswalk. At night, the old man hears strange sounds from the backyard, goes out to see what else has happened, and finds an injured extraterrestrial being in his patio. Once again, he tries to reach his daughter, but Denise, as always, is unreachable. He leaves a voicemail and waits for a call, but it's all in vain. The next morning, as usual, he attends the meeting. His friend Sandy this time proposes a new project for interacting with the youth. She has put up posters around the town and would be delighted if someone came to listen to her stories and advice. She is eager to be part of the lives of lonely young people who need friends. When it's Milton's turn, he starts with the town's motto and the crosswalk as usual, but after that he talks about the UFO that ruined his flowers and broke the bird feeder. However, nobody believes him, considering it the ramblings of an elderly man. Two active retirees, Sandy and Joyce, advise Milton not to bring up this topic at the meeting anymore, or else no one will take the suggestions of the elderly townspeople seriously. Sandy suggests giving the old man a ride home and reminds him that she is always nearby and he can count on her help. Milton becomes angry, realizing that he is being taken for a lunatic. That evening, Milton checks his backyard again to see the extraterrestrial being whom he had thought was dead, but the creature suddenly raises its head and looks at him plaintively. Milton wraps the unconscious extraterrestrial in a blanket again and leaves a glass of water for it. In the morning, he finds the extraterrestrial wrapped in a blanket and seemingly shivering at his back door. Milton invites it inside since it's warmer in the house. He doesn't know what to do because he has never experienced anything like this before. The old man notices that the visitor has drunk all the water, so he brings another glass. Then he prepares a tray with various foods he finds in his house, but the extraterrestrial chooses only an apple. So, Milton goes to the store to buy apples, explaining to the cashier that it's for an extraterrestrial. The cashier treats him like a crazy person with delusions. Upon returning home, Milton sits on the couch in the living room and hears news about the search for a crashed weather satellite, but doesn't pay it much attention because he is startled by the sudden appearance of the extraterrestrial. Seeing that it's feeling much better and can even walk, the old man shows the extraterrestrial all the amenities and settles it in his home, providing a guest room and introducing it to television. Personally, he prefers detective shows because you never know how they will end. Milton shows photos of his family to the silent but attentive extraterrestrial. Unfortunately, his wife is no longer with them. His son has moved to California and his daughter visits him occasionally. Then the old man remembers the dance show and sits in front of the TV, inviting the extraterrestrial to join. On that day, the store clerk tells Denise about her father's strange statements about the extraterrestrial, and she goes to visit him during her lunch break. Milton meets her at the door, and as always, she insists on him seeing a doctor because she is very concerned about his mental health. Milton reluctantly agrees. Denise rushes off, and as soon as she leaves, the phone rings. It's Sandy, urgently needing a printer, and Milton invites her to come over and print the necessary documents. The woman arrives, and upon entering, sees the extraterrestrial. Milton introduces them to each other and shows the crash site. The woman is shocked, but tells Milton that they must keep this a secret for his own safety. She mentions how she has seen on TV how authorities treat poor extraterrestrials, and he shouldn't let anyone into his home except her. Sandy leaves, but Joyce has already noticed her car outside Milton's house and becomes curious about what's happening. Meanwhile, on TV, calls continue for the population to search for the crashed satellite. Time passes, and the extraterrestrial continues to stay in Milton's house, watching his favorite shows together. One morning, it brings Milton a piece of paper with a drawing of a cat on it. This touches Milton's heart, as the little one has drawn him a picture. He finds the extraterrestrial working on repairing its spaceship, apparently having fully recovered and getting ready to go back home. Soon, Milton visits a neurologist and undergoes tests, making some frustrating mistakes in some of them. During this time, Sandy stays with the extraterrestrial and complains to it about her daughter, who moved to the West Coast and lives with her friend. She is very upset that her daughter doesn't visit and doesn't bring her only grandchild. Meanwhile, the doctor, upon learning about Milton's forgetfulness and his stories about extraterrestrials, concludes that his abilities are deteriorating rapidly and suggests considering outside assistance for him. This greatly upsets Milton, and he angrily leaves after shouting at his daughter. Sandy, setting aside the children's book she was reading to the extraterrestrial, tries to ask questions, but the old man goes to his room. Later, he finds the extraterrestrial by its spaceship and complains about his daughter, who wants to put him in a nursing home. He hasn't been in touch with his son, and it seems he was a bad father. The extraterrestrial listens very attentively to the old man, putting down its tools. After this, Milton leaves a voicemail for his son, telling him about his life and Denise's affairs, hoping that he will find it interesting. The next day, Sandy brings a t-shirt for the extraterrestrial as she thinks it's uncomfortable for it to be naked. She also suggests giving it a name, Jules. Milton gets irritated by what he considers silly suggestions but eventually agrees with his friend. Meanwhile, Joyce, upon hearing about the government's offer of a reward for information about the crashed satellite, goes to Milton's house and, looking through the window, sees the extraterrestrial. Now she is also in on Milton's secret and suggests naming the extraterrestrial Harry. Sandy suggests to Milton that he should acknowledge the fact that Joyce is joining their group, even though he's ready to kill the overly curious lady. Then she shows pictures of cats that Jules has drawn for him. Joyce speculates that Jules is trying to communicate something to the old man since all the drawings are of cats. However, Milton refuses to believe it. Meanwhile, the government receives numerous calls about various anomalies. One day, a woman complains about a man who spends hours staring at his rocket in the yard. FBI agents go to the given address but find a homemade rocket and a happy man next to it. At the same time, Joyce visits Milton to spend time with the extraterrestrial. She also gives it a t-shirt and offers it apples. During this time, Sandy receives a call from a young man who was interested in her posters. He comes to her house and the joyful woman invites him for tea. While Joyce talks to the extraterrestrial about her life in the big city, where she even performed in concerts because she sang well, Sandy engages in conversation with the guest, and Joyce suggests singing for the extraterrestrial. While she does that, the young man asks for permission to use Sandy's restroom, but when she follows him upstairs, she sees him stealing her jewelry. After she threatens to call the police, the man attacks her and tries to strangle her. However, the extraterrestrial has a vision of the events and telepathically makes the man's head explode. This raises suspicions at the FBI, who are conducting the search for the crashed spaceship. Responding to police questions, Sandy suddenly realizes who saved her from certain death and rushes to Milton's house. She hugs Jules and tearfully thanks him for saving her life. The retirees discuss the potential danger of the extraterrestrial, but conclude that it's only dangerous to bad people. Meanwhile, the FBI agents can't understand how and from what the head of the criminal could have burst, so they decide to keep an eye on Sandy. On this day, Denise meets the elderly folks at the store and again brings up the topic of the apples Milton bought. However, Milton avoids the conversation. Later, the group has lunch at Milton's house when Sandy notices a strange smell. When they go outside, they discover a dead cat that Jules apparently brought there. Connecting all the facts, the retirees realize that the extraterrestrial needs cats for some reason, and now there are not 7, as in the picture, but 6. Milton calls Denise, hoping to find out where she disposes of the deceased cats in her clinic, which frightens her completely. Not receiving a clear answer, Milton and Sandy decide to drive around the streets of the town, since cats often meet their fate under car wheels. On the road, Milton inquires about Sandy's husband's illness, which eventually led to his passing, and she talks about being left alone. She starts asking questions, reassuring that life must go on. However, at this point, Milton asks her to stop the car, and the FBI agents become witnesses as the elderly couple loads a deceased cat into the trunk. That day, they find 2 more cats, and Joyce promises to find the rest. Meanwhile, FBI agents eavesdrop on the private conversations of Milton's close ones and hear Denise telling her brother about her father's eccentricities. At this moment, Joyce brings 3 more cats she found in different parts of the town. Only one is missing. Just then, agents knock on the door, but the elderly folks hide and don't open it. The men eventually leave, and the people realize they need to act quickly. And then, Milton remembers Joyce's deaf, blind, and non-mobile cat. Offended, she leaves, but Sandy catches up with her and apologizes for Milton's bluntness. Joyce admits that he's right. It's long past time to end the suffering of the cat. She brings the animal, and the extraterrestrial puts it to eternal sleep. Then it covers the remains with some material, and they start to merge into a single object. In the end, a glowing object appears in front of the group, which serves as fuel for Jules's spaceship. The saucer lifts off into the air and moves to the center of the yard, which is instantly detected by the FBI's instruments. The retirees understand that the time for farewell has come. Joyce gives Jules a souvenir globe with a view of the city inside. Sandy gives him a sweater she knitted, and Milton gives him his driver's license with a photo. But the extraterrestrial suddenly makes an inviting gesture, clearly offering them to join, and Milton suddenly decides to accept the invitation. But then the phone rings in the house, and picking up the receiver he hears Denise's voice. She suggests meeting on Saturday. They'll have lunch and then she'll give him a haircut because they've been arguing, and that's not right. At that moment, agents knock on the door. Milton rushes into the yard, and they only manage to see the departing saucer, where 3 Earthlings joined in the last moment. The ship lands not far from the town to safely disembark the elderly and bid them a peaceful farewell. Milton hugs the extraterrestrial and thanks it for the invitation to travel together, but he can't leave his home and loved ones behind. Jules enters the spaceship and flies away while the elderly folks wave goodbye to him. Time passes. Milton continues to live in his home, visited by Sandy and Joyce. The elderly often reminisce about Jules' Harry and hope that he hasn't forgotten them either. And one night, Milton's yard is illuminated by a bright light, and the old man realizes that he has guests. A light, heartwarming, and slightly melancholic film about the fading of human life. It's good that amid the plethora of recently produced nonsense, there are still such heartfelt and warm movies in which an extraterrestrial is not a villain who came to Earth to conquer it, but rather a cute and understanding silent being with expressive eyes. In the Middle East, a man appears who calls himself the Messiah and gathers crowds of believers in the new Advent. Is he sent by God, or is he a dangerous fraud seeking to disrupt the world's geopolitical order? The story is told through the eyes of people from vastly different backgrounds surrounding the enigmatic man. For 85 days, enemies have besieged Damascus, where a humanitarian catastrophe is growing. There is no food or water, and many people are dying in the shelling. And one day, 2 teenagers, Jabril and Samir, who have lost their families, see a man in yellow clothes on the street, urging people not to worry about the city's fall because God has predetermined that it will not happen. Salvation in the form of a sandstorm is approaching, and people run under the onslaught of the elements while the preacher does not leave and repeats that salvation is already close. The sandstorm breaks the supply chains of the enemy troops, and they retreat, and the city is saved. FBI agent Eva Geller watches the broadcast of everything that happened, paying attention to this strange man whom people call Al-Masih, and learns that he is leading hundreds of his followers into the desert. At night, the men talk about faith and religion around the fire. Al-Masih asks questions and is strict with those who do not want to think about his questions. Now all of humanity is on the brink, and for people to survive, they must cling to him. After this conversation, the man walks away from the people and stands for a long time looking at the sky, giving the impression that he's talking to God. The teenagers who came with him from Damascus remember how he preached while they hid in the basement, and suddenly Al-Masih calls one of them, Jabril, and tells him that each soul has its own star. He saw light in the boy, and soon Allah will lay a mission on him. Meanwhile, Eva is trying to find out which officers know something about the new Messiah and begins gathering information. Soon she learns that after walking 65 kilometers through the sands, the people reached the borders of Israel and stopped at the fence. Half of the followers believe that Al-Masih has led them to flight, but he orders them to gather all their weapons and bury them. He himself passes through the barbed wire fence, where he is arrested by Israel's border service. An agent from Israel's internal security agency, Aviram Dahan, is called in to interrogate him. However, the detained man refuses to reveal his real name, calling himself a messenger, and impresses the agent by calling him by name and revealing unexpected details from the agent's life that no one except the agent himself could know. Aviram is particularly touched by the incident with the boy that the Messiah reminds him of. Dahan completes the interrogation and leaves the room, destroying the video recording of the interrogation. He then goes to his partner to find out if he has told anyone about what happened in the desert, but his partner remains silent about it. As Aviram gets into his car, he suddenly sees a man with a bag over his head on the back seat, but realizes that it is a flashback to a tragedy from long ago. Early in the morning, the agent returns to work and is surprised to discover that Al-Masih has escaped from custody. Meanwhile, in the small American town of Dili, local preacher Felix Aguero greets his congregation, while the FBI decides to assist Israeli authorities in finding Al-Masih and discovering who he really is. This is why Eva Geller flies to Israel, and her insistence Aviram is summoned to the office, but he cannot explain why he deleted the video recording. He behaves provocatively, not understanding why he should be accountable to the American woman. Meanwhile, an international conflict is brewing in the world as people who were led by the Messiah to the border of Israel are starving. Even after hearing about his escape, they decide to stay because they believe in his return. One day, volunteers bring food and water, and the Messiah's followers notice that the police are looking for someone in the crowd. They realize that Al-Masih has escaped, which causes unprecedented rejoicing. At the same time, Al-Masih delivers a sermon on the Temple Mount, using apocalyptic phrases about the end of history and calling on those who are willing to go to God's judgment to step forward. A young boy comes forward, but the sermon is interrupted by the Israeli police who try to arrest the Messiah. The operation fails due to a shot that hits the child who has come out. The people start screaming, driving away the invaders. But then Al-Masih lays his hands on the boy, who then stands up unharmed, showing the bloody bullet to the public. The people consider this a miracle while Al-Masih disappears into the crowd. Eva hears the news on the radio and asks to be taken to the scene of the incident. Meanwhile, Muslims also discuss the Messiah's sermon and are quite unhappy with his interpretation of Allah's teachings. The people in the camp cannot understand why their newly found Jesus has abandoned them. And Eva notices the surveillance, and her pursuer turns out to be Aviram, who wants to know why she's meddling in something that's not her business. But Eva is not going to back down. She studies the recordings from the CCTV cameras and notices the strange disappearance of the Messiah. And it's still unclear who fired the shot. She tries to find the injured boy, while in Jerusalem the electricity is shut off to quell the unrest. The agents arrive at the boy's address, but it turns out that his family has left, scared of the crowd's interest. Reports of the incident on the Temple Mount are being shown around the world, and one of them is seen by Father Felix, while his daughter Rebecca dreams of running away from home. Meanwhile, Jabril sees a flickering light at the fence and goes there, while Eva finds Al-Masih in a photo from Jordan. Palestinian girls bring food for the hungry and promise to help people. Jabril goes to get assistance when a man who appears hits him on the head and takes him away from the fence. That same night, the pastor's daughter Rebecca runs away from home, while her disillusioned father decides to burn down his church. The man takes a canister of gasoline and a lighter and heads towards the building. At that moment, a message about an approaching tornado comes to his phone, which was left at home, and the pastor's wife goes to find him. Sirens begin to sound in the town, and the residents hurry to the only shelter, the church, as the tornado begins its deadly circle. Father Felix calls his daughter, hoping she's nearby, and suddenly sees the motionless figure of Al-Masih nearby. Later on, a video of Rebecca's rescue appears in social media, which is intercepted by CIA agents and blocked from spreading. But how did the Messiah end up in America? Soon, Federal Agent Will arrives at the scene. The man is shaken by the sight of the completely destroyed town, where only one building, the church, survived, and where Al-Masih is currently located, explaining to the astonished priest that he came here by God's will. Felix is shaken because he was planning to burn down the building that ended up saving everyone's lives. At that moment, Agent Will enters and arrests the Messiah. The priest swears to get Al-Masih out of jail, while Aviram interrogates Jabril in the hopes of finding out the Messiah's whereabouts. But the boy does not know. The agent wants to understand why people follow the men unknown to anyone and promises to prove that there is no God. Meanwhile, Felix turns to a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union for help because everything that happened was not a mere coincidence. And Eva arrives in Texas to question Al-Masih, but his lawyer manages to obtain a ban on the meeting. The situation worsens when one of the videos about what happened in the town circumvents their social media block and reaches the mass media. Al-Masikh's lawyer tells him that while the charge of illegal entry into the United States is likely to be upheld in court, she can get him out of the federal immigration detention center where he's being held. When the lawyer leaves the detention center, Agent Will informs Eva of this and she rushes to see him. However, during their conversation, Al-Masih turns the situation around in his favor again by showing that he knows her name and sympathizes with her losses, as her mother and husband have passed away. He realizes his responsibility for those who followed him and is willing to help all who are suffering, including her, but Eva doesn't believe his sincerity and runs away, failing to notice the recording device under the table. Returning to her hotel room, Eva talks to her boss, who informs her that Israel is demanding Al-Masih extradition and the state prosecutor will seek permission for it. Later, Al-Masih is taken to court where he is charged, which he admits to and requests asylum. Eva goes to the lawyer, trying to convince her to stop fighting for the man's release to prevent his extradition. After all, if he returns to Israel, he will be imprisoned, but the lawyer refuses to talk about it. Meanwhile, Aviram again refuses to reveal what happened during the interrogation, whose recording he erased. He's suspended from the case and a hearing is scheduled. At this time, Felix tells his wife about his departure because he's needed by the Messiah. A multitude of Al-Masih's followers gather outside the courthouse. The hearing begins and the lawyer explains that the man cannot return to Israel where he will be persecuted for religious reasons. But the prosecutor claims that the man is lying about being a Muslim because he does not pray 5 times a day as required. The Messiah responds that he belongs to all denominations because everyone walks under the same sun. This causes a storm of emotions around the world, even in high-level offices. The assistant to the President of the United States tries to pressure the judge to deport the unwanted man, and the judge promises to consider it. Meanwhile, Samir finds his friend Jabril abandoned by Aviram in the desert, and he considers it a true miracle that he survived. The next day, the court makes the shocking decision to grant asylum to Mr. Masih, allowing him to leave the courthouse as a free man, with the car of the Venerable Iguero waiting for him outside. People all over the world are talking about the Messiah and beginning to believe in the miracles he performs. In Dili, those seeking healing begin to gather. The Reverend tries to organize their accommodation while Samir faithfully tends to Jabril. The Messiah brought by the pastor settles in isolation from people in a small tent where only Felix has access. One day, the preacher dares to ask Al-Masih about his future plans, and he says he does not know what will happen next. After all, Felix brought him here, and this instills despair in the preacher's soul. He thought that the Messiah was acting according to a preconceived plan. That same evening, Agent Will comes to Eva and shows her a recording of a conversation with Al-Masih. Then he shows her a book by one of the radicals, Wallace, about cultural terrorism, in which the words of the Messiah are repeated verbatim. It turns out that Al-Masih is acting according to this scenario, the goal of which is the destruction of the existing order. Meanwhile, things are going badly for the refugees who remain at the Israeli border without water and food, and soon Samir begins to wonder where Jabril's strong faith comes from. He calls his friend crazy for refusing medical help as his injuries could be fatal, and accuses him of an abnormal love for the Messiah. One day, Aviram's wife notices his car, which has been parked near their house for 3 days, and begins to search for the man, who at this time arrives in Texas and buys a gun at the gun store. And in Dili, every evening people gather together hoping that Al-Masih will come out to them. But the man remains in his tent, bringing Felix into a state of confusion that spills over into a sermon for all who have come. At this time, 2 residents of Dili finally find their dog crushed by furniture during the hurricane and try to free it. Al-Masih comes out of his tent just as armed Aviram approaches it. The Messiah calmly looks into the eyes of his killer, and Aviram lowers his gun and looks at the departing man's back. The people notice the Messiah, who is walking towards the house where the man decides to shoot the poor dog as it is suffering greatly. The boy asks Al-Masih to save his dog, but he takes a gun and shoots the dog, causing the boy's anger and pain, and then he leaves the town. At this time, Eva catches up with Aviram and he confesses that he wanted to kill the Messiah, who at that time calls pastor's daughter Rebecca to come with him. Meanwhile, the refugees decide that the Messiah has abandoned them and they decide to return to the city, but Jabril stays behind. In the morning, the young man dreams of his deceased mother, who turns into the Messiah and reaches out to him. At the same time, the Texas police ask the pilgrims not to come to Dili as the city is completely destroyed. Dissatisfied, the people are ready to expel Al-Masih and Father Felix. They write protest messages about the false prophet on the church walls. Meanwhile, Eva learns the true name of the Messiah, Payam Shari, and he has a brother who works at the university. The Messiah tells Father Felix that it is time to get on the road, persuading Felix that this is his destiny. The pastor decides to take his family with him, which upsets his wife but pleases his daughter. Father Felix leads a column of cars that follow the Messiah wherever he leads them. The number of cars is constantly growing, and soon it begins to count in the hundreds. Eva also returns to Texas to follow Al-Masih, and one night sees him come out to make a call from a payphone on the street. At her request, Agent Will requests a copy of the telephone conversation. The next day, the column continues on its way. Stopping for a break, the pastor hears news of the crisis on the border where the refugees from Palestine are still waiting for their fate. Rebecca takes a picture of the Messiah standing by a road sign in Washington and posts it on social media. In the morning, the column sets off, and Felix learns from the posts that their path leads to the US Capitol. At the same time, Eva checks everything she can find about the Messiah and comes across information that he studied at the same university where the notorious terrorist Wallace taught, whose book Al-Masih quoted during the interrogation. Professor Wallace hacked the stock exchange and then fled to Russia during the investigation into his actions. This means that the case of the alleged attack is completely within Eva's jurisdiction. The huge column arrives in Washington, and Al-Masih goes to the Lincoln Memorial, while Jabril has a vision of his late mother and Al-Masih. The Messiah speaks about the unity of people in the world around them, and Jabril suddenly stands up as if hearing his speech. Al-Masih asks to look at himself and his neighbors. Jabril strips naked. The Messiah stands before the nation and looks at them so that they finally look at him. It's too late to kneel, time is up. Jabril walks towards the border. Al-Masih heads for the water. Jabril walks non-stop until a soldier's gun barrel is pressed against his chest, and Al-Masih walks on the water. The Israelis retreat, and Jabril leads the refugees. Hundreds of amazed spectators follow the Messiah's journey and record this on their telephone cameras. The world is buzzing after witnessing the miracles of Al-Masih, and even the Congregation of the Causes of Saints is considering the case. Everywhere there are clashes between the followers and the opponents of the newly emerged Messiah. People are sending money to Father Felix, who intends to build the Church of Al-Masih with it. Meanwhile, Jabril arrives in Western Jordan, where he is welcomed as a liberator. The refugees are brought to a secluded house where they will be given food and shelter. But Jabril is separated from the others as he openly declares his allegiance to Al-Masih. Meanwhile, Eva reports her findings to his superiors. The Messiah has a fairly long trail of connections to banned organizations and, most importantly, to Wallace, who is now hiding in Moscow. Senior officials in the US government are concerned about the popularity of Al-Masih, so the head of the White House staff demands that the CIA do everything possible to discredit him. But Eva reminds them, this is not just terrorism, this is a new level of destabilizing society. Meanwhile, the society is discussing the Messiah with ever-increasing fervor. People are divided into those who unquestionably believe in him and those who consider him a false prophet. Felix preaches on behalf of Al-Masih and reminds people of the importance of faith. The Lord has chosen them specifically, and it is important to understand why. At this time, a woman with a terminally ill child sneaks into the hotel of the Messiah, and the man agrees to take the girl, but only alone. However, his room is under 24-hour surveillance. Meanwhile, the young refugees begin to learn different sciences, among which religion is at the forefront. Sheikh personally comes to Jabril to understand the depth of his faith, and the young man confidently answers that he unquestionably believes in the Messiah. Meanwhile, Eva discusses the Messiah's water-walking feat with Aviram. After all, Jesus did the same thing. He performed tricks and attracted supporters. The man is impressed. She speaks like a true Jew. Agent Will continues to monitor the Messiah's room and one day witnesses a girl knocking on his door, praying for healing. But the man immediately understands the true purpose of her visit. The girl has come to seduce him. He reveals her soul, pitying the woman who sells her body, and from this her soul melts and dies. The girl admits that she was paid for the visit and cries from the moving words of the Messiah, who confesses to her the eternal love of God for his children. These words bring tears to Agent Will's eyes, who is watching the scene. At that time, Rebecca runs out of her parents' room and sees the Messiah escorting the girl out of his own room. The girl runs away and Al-Masih catches up to her on the street. He tries to explain her special place next to him, and the girl shares her observations that the world seems to be on the brink of something grand. The prophet turns to Rebecca and asks her to do something unimaginable, and she promises to do anything he asks. Meanwhile, the CIA manages to find al-Masih's brother, who reveals that their parents were of different faiths and died early. The boys were raised by their uncle, a professional illusionist, and al-Masih always loved being the center of attention. The uncle was a tough man, but he taught the boys everything he knew: English, literacy, and most importantly, how to perform tricks. And at that moment, someone puts a dark bag over al-Masih's head as he enters his room. The man finds himself in the office of the President of the United States, standing before the head of state and demanding the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from around the world using the president's sincere faith. The politician is shocked. It's simply impossible, since the American troops are used precisely as peacekeepers, and if they are not present, there will be chaos in the countries under their control. However, the Messiah lists the names of countries and cities where Americans have been waging wars. He offers the president the chance to go down in history as a true peacemaker saving the world. And he says that the history has ended and the world will soon start anew. Meanwhile, Eva learns that a few years ago, al-Masih was placed in a psychiatric clinic and goes to the college where the men studied. But the director can't remember anything particularly noteworthy except for his thesis. Eva goes to the archives, but the thesis is not there. In Jordan, the sheikh shows Jabril an article in a newspaper about the miracles of al-Masih and asks him to give a speech at the upcoming celebration. The boy must become the leader of the new generation in the struggle for Palestinian independence. The next day, al-Masih announces to the media about his meeting with the president, and this infuriates Felix, who believes that he should have been informed about it. The president also faces similar attacks. He is heavily guarded against this freak, but he himself goes to the meeting. However, the man interrupts all conversations. He must first think about the people. Angered, Felix expresses his grievance to al-Masih, and the letter suggests that he kneel before him if he truly believes that he is the Messiah. The preacher thinks it over as the Messiah leaves the room. On the other hand, Agent Will begins to unquestionably believe in al-Masih and quits his job. Meanwhile, Eva receives the call logs she requested. That same evening, Aviram asks al-Masih about his family and mocks him, offering to walk on water again. But the man only smiles in response and asks a counter question: why isn't Aviram leaving? The agent can't answer. The president talks to al-Masih again, and he informs him that there is no more time to think. At that moment, water begins to flood the president's feet. Upon waking up, the man learns about an unprecedented flood destroying the U.S. coastline. Later, the daughter of the Reverend Iguero tells him that al-Masih came to Texas for her, not for her father. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a guard confesses that he was the one who freed the Messiah from prison, not Aviram Dahan. That same night, the girl hired by the president's assistant to compromise al-Masih returns all the money she received for it. She doesn't care whether he's real or not. What matters to her is that he's a very good person. Meanwhile, the president flies over the affected areas and, in addition to providing material assistance, urges people to pray and hope for the help of the Lord. At the same time, the pastor's wife asks al-Masih why he chose their family. He says that faith can be found everywhere, and he wants the same thing that the Lord wants, the flood. Meanwhile, in Jordan, the sheikh is teaching Jabril about the speeches and Palestine's independence. It's very difficult for the illiterate boy to remember unfamiliar words, but the sheikh is insistent. His friends are also being heavily influenced at this time, with religious ideas being drilled into their heads. Meanwhile, Reverend Felix asks a famous showman to include al-Masih in his program. After all, it's a chance to speak to the multimillion audience. Eva checks all the numbers on the list and finds one that al-Masih calls frequently and talks to the caller for quite some time. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is informed of the buildup of Russian troops on the border with Latvia and is demanded to make a tough decision. On that day, Eva finds al-Masih to tell him that she knows about his diagnosis, Messiah complex, given to him in the psychiatric clinic, and about his uncle, the magician. She thinks someone is using him and promises to find and arrest the puppeteer. And he confirms that he knows Wallace, who is still his friend despite being accused of terrorism. After that, Felix tells al-Masih about the invitation to television and he agrees, but only if the Reverend brings his daughter with him. In the evening, Eva talks to her father and is amazed to learn that her own father believes that al-Masih is the Messiah of the end of times. Meanwhile, it turns out that the complex in the Badia is a terrorist training camp, and Samira is being prepared for the role of a suicide bomber. Meanwhile, Eva decides to act on her own and dials the number that Al-Masih constantly calls. She hears Wallace's voice in response, so his theories about Al-Masih's connection to the terrorist are confirmed. But during the conversation, the man refutes all her conclusions. It's a pity, but she doesn't understand what's going on. And of the two of them, he is not the most dangerous one. The woman flips to his book again, reads the dedication on the title page, and has an epiphany. Meanwhile, the president requests an analysis of full withdrawal of American troops from Eastern Europe. Eva goes to her boss. Wallace's book is the work of Al-Masih, so it's actually the opposite. The recognized terrorist is a disciple of the Messiah. In the meantime is the day of the television appearance. Al-Masih and Rebecca prepare for their performance. At the mosque, many believers come to listen to Jabril's first speech. The boy is very nervous, but the sheikh is nearby and guides him. The show host warms up the audience before the Messiah's appearance on stage, while Samira is also being taken to the mosque. But just before going on stage, the Messiah leaves the studio and gets into a car, while Samira puts on the suicide bomber belt. The audience demands the Messiah's appearance, and Rebecca takes the stage. Jabril starts his speech about the Messiah simultaneously with Rebecca, while Al-Masih is driving in Avram's car. The teenagers repeat his words to the audiences: "We are all one people." At that moment, Samir enters the mosque, shows the explosive device attached to his chest, and raises the button. Looking into Jabril's eyes, he can't bring himself to press the button. However, Samir's mentor remotely activates the bomb vest. Rebecca suddenly loses consciousness in the studio. A powerful explosion rocks the mosque. The action moves back several years, when Avram and his partner kidnapped, interrogated, and killed an underage son of one of those who had organized an explosion in which Avram's mother died. But it turned out that the boy was not the man's son at all, and it is still haunting the agent. In the present, he himself is driving the Messiah to the airport to deliver him to Israel. After the mosque bombing, the victims are given help. Unconscious Jabril is carried out on a stretcher. The same thing happens to Rebecca. Meanwhile, Eva Geller learns that Al-Masih has been kidnapped. The CIA tracks the plane on which he's being taken, unaware that it was all done on the orders of the president's assistant. Rebecca wakes up and tells her father that the Messiah is gone, and he will not return. Jabril wakes up in the back of a truck and sees a dead man next to him. He squeezes his hand and the fingers twitch under his palm. Eva finds out that the plane with the Messiah has taken off from a government airfield, and her boss tries to pressure higher-ups to find out the plane's destination, threatening to tell the president about everything that has happened, and thus driving the country's leader's assistant into a corner. At the same time, in the sky, Al-Masih talks to Avram, persuading him to free his conscience because God still loves him, and that people always choose between good and evil, and the last thing he will see before he dies is the face of that boy. Meanwhile, the president's assistant decides to reveal Al-Masih's true name to the press and the folder with his dossier, highlighting his mental illness and the fact that he was raised by an illusionist. In the sky, the plane begins to experience severe turbulence. There is an explosion in the tail, and Avram sees the face of the deceased boy in front of him, whose face is being covered by the Messiah's hands. In the command center, Eva is informed that the plane's signals have disappeared from the radar. She realizes that a tragedy has occurred. On TV, news reports reveal the Messiah's real name and biography, causing confusion among Al-Masih's followers. After hearing everything, Felix leaves the hospital. Jabril also watches Messiah's brother talk about his ability to perform magic tricks. Eva accuses the president's assistant of destroying the diplomatic plane, but he warns her to watch her tongue. The woman is overwhelmed because the entire operation has collapsed and she cannot prove anything. Meanwhile, Father Felix arrives at his church and sets it on fire. He no longer believes in anything. Meanwhile, Avram wakes up in the middle of blooming poppies and sees the Messiah above him. Then a local boy appears before him, offering him a flask of water and enthusiastically stating that the man has performed the miracle. He resurrected Avram and another man. They both were unquestionably dead, with gray faces and flies crawling over them. Then he touched them and they came back to life. The agent watches in amazement as his partner bows to the perfectly unharmed Messiah standing in front of him. The film is a story about the coming of the Messiah, the prophet, in the modern world. It is an interesting and easy-to-understand film with deep thoughts expressed by Al-Masih in conversations with completely different people. ranging from an illiterate boy to the President of the United States. On the one hand, it is a weird combination, but on the other hand, it is quite understandable as the Messiah claims that we all walk under one sun. After a young priest arrives on an isolated island, supernatural events, incredible miracles, and frightening omens begin to occur. And it turns out that all of this is caused by the blood of an angel, which turns people who drink it into demons. Riley Flynn looks in horror at the girl hit by his car. The man realizes he is guilty because he was drunk, but there is nothing he can do about it. Later, the man freely admits his guilt and goes to prison, where every night before going to sleep he sees the girl he killed. 4 years have passed. Riley's mother, Annie, eagerly awaits his son's arrival in his homeland, a fishing village on Crockett Island off the coast of Washington state, and raises her youngest son, Warren, forbidding him to go to the peat bogs. But the boy wouldn't listen to her lecturing, and having met his friends, he goes to the forbidden place because no one will prevent the young people there from trying illegal substances and having a great time. They buy the stuff from a local dealer and go to the peat bogs. On the way, the guys stop at the house where Lisa lives. The girl cannot walk. She refuses the offered treat, and the trio goes on their way. At this time, a young man with a huge box locked with padlocks enters the door of the local priest's house. The boys get into a boat and make their way to the far shore of the island. It's already dark, so when they hear a sound of huge wings, the boys mistake them for a giant heron taking off. The peat bogs are also teeming with stray cats that were brought here from the mainland, and they feed on old remains because up until the 1920s people buried their dead right in the yards, and now when the peat bogs get flooded, those remains resurface. Warren knows this because after storms all this creepiness washes ashore where their house stands. The boys settle in their usual spot and after taking some revelatory substances start telling tales about local ghosts. At that moment, loud cat cries are heard from the bushes, and Warren, shining his flashlight in that direction, sees 2 burning eyes following them. But they immediately disappear, and the boy forgets about the incident. In the morning, Riley arrives on the island. Annie meets her son and apologizes for his father and younger brother who could not meet him because they were out fishing. Meanwhile, the ferry is met by a zealous parishioner, Bev Keane, who is concerned about the long absence of Father Pruitt. But the priest is not on the ferry. Meanwhile, teacher Erin Grin undergoes an ultrasound examination of the unborn child, and the doctor assures her that there is nothing wrong with the baby. The women pay attention to Riley, from which they are distracted by the appearance of the doctor's elderly mother who suffers from dementia. Annie introduces her son to the new sheriff, and the latter greets the boy. The sheriff then wakes up the only detainee, local alcoholic Joe, who came running in the night screaming that a huge albatross was chasing him. The sheriff releases sobered-up Joe, and he walks out to his dog, who has been waiting for his master at the exit all night. Bev, who is passing by, is indignant. The dog is dangerous, it could attack, but they don't listen to her. Meanwhile, Riley and Annie reach their house. The woman shares her problems. There has been an oil spill accident, and now fishermen can only catch fish according to their quota. Naturally, this causes money problems. Previously, hundreds of families lived on the island, but now there are only dozens left. In the meantime, there is a meeting at the school because a storm is coming to the island very soon, and it is necessary to make sure the shelter is ready. The new sheriff calls for it to be equipped in the school, but Bev objects. Everything has been ready in the church for a long time, and there is no need to change anything. All members of the Flynn family finally get together for dinner. Riley informs them that he has to travel to the mainland to check in with the Alcoholics Anonymous, which is one of the conditions for his release. Warren talks about the new teacher, a daughter of an ex. Riley perks up. Is Erin really back on the island? And learns of her pregnancy. Annie announces that their old priest, Father Pruitt, has made the trip to the Holy Land, despite his age-related problems. Warren serves as an altar boy and is aware of the pastor's forgetfulness. Riley disappoints his parents. He has no intention of going to church, which incurs the wrath of his father, a devout Catholic. Meanwhile, Bev notices a light in the windows of Pruitt's house and, upon entering, stares in surprise at the man who meets her. And in the shoreline thickets, attacks on the cats begin to occur. Before going to bed, the father tells Riley that after what happened to him, Annie goes to church every day and prays for him. He asks the boy to at least sit in the pew, for it is very important to his mother. At this time, the new sheriff and his son perform namaz before going to bed. The doctor catches the mother trying to climb to the second floor, and Riley sees Warren climb out the window to go to his friends. At night, Riley as usual sees recurrent dreams of the dead girl and of himself sitting in the boat. The dawn is breaking. The altar workers are preparing for the upcoming church service and notice that the wine bowls are already full. The congregation takes their seats. Bev opens the service, people sing hymns while the new priest enters the room. Paul Hill has been sent to replace Father Pruitt, who has left and is hospitalized on the mainland. Paul conducts the service and administers communion to the faithful except for Riley, who has refused to do so. The new priest calls all the parishioners by name, explaining this by Pruitt's stories. Riley decides to accompany Aaron, and the young people reminisce about their past encounters and talk about their experiences. They both vowed not to go back, but nevertheless they are on the island again. Riley lost everything after the accident and Erin is separated from her husband. The man admits that he read all about different religions while he was in prison because he hoped to find God but ended up being an atheist. And here he is of no use to anyone and doesn't know how to move on. In the evening, the storm comes to the island and Riley sees what looks like Father Pruitt walking along the beach, but when he goes out to look, he finds no one. And in the morning, people find hundreds of dead cats on the beach. The citizens cannot determine the cause of death of these animals, although the sheriff suggests some kind of disease, until he discovers that there is not a drop of blood in their bodies. Riley admits to seeing Monsignor Pruitt at night, but nobody believes him. Later, the man travels to the mainland while Father Paul holds a service, but the church is almost empty. Of the regular parishioners, there's only Lisa, the mayor's paralyzed daughter. The priest gives her communion, then walks her home and learns that the girl's mutilation is the result of an accidental shooting by drunk Joe. In the meantime, Erin catches Bev in the storeroom, from where the woman takes a box of poison intending to poison the rats, which have become too numerous. And Father Paul comes to Dr. Sarah's house to administer communion to her sick mother. The elderly woman calls him by the name of Pruitt, which her daughter believes is a symptom of the developing dementia. Back on the island, Riley speaks to Erin. It becomes clear that the two were romantically involved in their early youth. And Annie suddenly notices that her eyesight has improved considerably. In the morning, Father Paul meets his flock at Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Easter Lent. He gives an inspiring speech about the rebirth of the island and the first disciples of Christ, the fishermen. And he reminds them, man must remember that he is dust, and to dust he shall return. After the blessing, the residents gather for the feast. Riley speaks to the priest and again recalls Father Pruitt. He is convinced his eyes did not betray him that night. It was Father Pruitt. Father Paul suggests starting an Alcoholics Anonymous group on the island so that Riley doesn't have to travel so far, especially since there are others here suffering from this evil. The fun is interrupted by an unpleasant incident. Joe's dog dies after eating food off the ground. A new morning arrives. Riley goes out fishing with his father because the father has a bad back. Meanwhile, the sheriff goes to the school pantry where Bev confesses that she left poison in some parts of the island and the dog really could have died from it. But it was unintentional and anyone could have taken the poison. In the evening, Riley visits Father Paul and reveals that Bev has extorted donations for the church from the parishioners after convincing them to accept an agreement with the oil company that poisoned the waters of the bay and to receive generous compensation. And it's the same story everywhere else in the world. Villages are getting poorer and churches are getting more luxurious. The father reminds Riley that he was once a believer, and the boy expresses his contempt for the doctrine of good deity because the idea that suffering leads to purification is appalling. At night, Erin sees a mysterious creature near her house and noticing the bloody discharge rushes to the doctor. But Sarah reassures the woman there is nothing wrong with her baby. Later, she has to convince the frightened mother that she just imagined a face in the window. Meanwhile, the dealer passing by an empty house hears strange noises inside. He walks through the door and is attacked. It is morning and Father Paul, for some reason, takes a particularly close look at Lisa. Then he insists that the girl get up from her chair and come up for communion. And to everyone's shock, Lisa gets up and walks up to the priest. At night, Father Paul enters the confessional and tells himself that he is lying to the parishioners. After all, Father Pruitt was sicker than they thought, and having gone to the Holy Land, the man often fell behind the group. But the parishioners don't need to know that. They will believe that their shepherd is being healed on the mainland and will soon return to the island to witness the miracles that are happening. For after Lisa's recovery, which is perceived by the residents as a miracle, a religious revival begins on Crockett Island, except that Father Paul himself becomes sick and vomits blood after the accomplishment, which Bev sees. And then the woman notices a newspaper clipping with Father Pruitt's portrait hanging on the wall of the priest's house. The doctor examines Lisa and cannot understand the miracle that has occurred, but her parents strongly oppose her examination on the mainland. And later, the woman finds her mother on the second floor of the house, to which she climbed on her own, although she has not been able to walk for a long time. Meanwhile, suffering people begin to converge on the church, which pleases Bev immensely but displeases Father Paul. He doesn't need the publicity, especially since many, including Riley, think it's a misdiagnosis by doctors. But that same evening, a miracle happens to his father. The man suddenly stops having back pain and even asks his wife to dance. At this time, Lisa summons Warren and the couple runs off to have fun, and Riley goes to Aaron. More and more parishioners come to the morning mass, and one day Warren catches Father Paul pouring some kind of liquid into the wine, and during the sermon the priest suddenly collapses without feeling. The story shifts to the time of Father Paul's confession, in which he tells the true story of Monsignor Pruitt. After a visit to Jerusalem near Damascus, he was caught in a sandstorm and took refuge in ancient ruins. This is where Father Paul comes to his senses. He is examined by Sarah, though the man is against any intervention. Meanwhile, the sheriff finds a Bible in his son Ali's possession, and Lisa visits Joe and confesses that she hated him for years for stealing her future, but eventually forgives him. That same day at the school assembly, the sheriff tries unsuccessfully to convince Bev to stop handing out the Bibles to public school students. Later, Erin confesses that she's intimidated by Bev's confidence in her rightness, and Riley shares with her Father Paul's assignment to write penitential letters to loved ones. That same evening, Sarah's mother begins to speak quite sensibly, much to the doctor's surprise. And touched by Lisa's forgiveness, Joe decides to attend the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with Riley and Father Paul because he intends to change his life. The men go home and Joe confesses that he recently buried his sister on the mainland. That same evening, Ali asks for his father's permission to attend the mass. The kid is interested in everything that happens in the church, but the sheriff is against it. They are Muslims. Ali reminds him it's his father's decision, not his. But the father recalls how his dying wife praised Allah until the very last moment. God cannot decide who gets a miracle and who does not. The sheriff turns off the light and jumps away from the window because behind it is a pale face, but the next moment there is nothing. In the meantime, Father Paul collapses in front of Bev and the congregation and dies coughing up blood. The action carries over to the moment when Pruitt takes refuge in the dark cave. He burns matches, trying to make out the room where he is trapped, and suddenly sees two burning eyes. Then he is attacked by a nightmarish creature that sucks his blood and drinks his own blood in return. The priest concludes that it is an angel because when he wakes up in the morning, Pruitt finds that he is young again. So he decided to take his savior with him. He rode ahead, waiting for the angel to catch up with him. And he was very much afraid that the angel would disappear. Here on the island he hid it from everyone and lied to the parishioners because he was Father Pruitt. The next moment the priest comes back to life. During a scheduled checkup, the doctor informs Erin that her uterus is empty. It was probably a miscarriage. The woman is shocked. How could she not have noticed it at such a late stage? Meanwhile, Bev cancels the mass and her assistant notices the incredible resemblance between Father Paul and Monsignor Pruitt. She is convinced of the miracle and the others are simply frightened. Bev enters the priest's room and discovers that he cannot stand the light. It is also as if he can feel God inside him. Bev persuades him to manifest the miracle to his new apostles. Riley notices an improvement in his father's well-being, and the father confesses his unjust anger towards his son and asks for forgiveness for his omissions. Meanwhile, Sarah is collecting Erin's tests when her mother enters the office. She answers her daughter's questions confidently and looks much better than before. And then Sarah sees the blood in the test tube begin to boil in the sun and burn to the ground. In the meantime, distraught, Erin spends the day with Riley, mourning her unborn child and discussing their childhood. She resents her mother, who was a real dictator and never loved her daughter. And then she managed to marry her mother's mental double, which only her pregnancy saved her from. She just packed up and left. Then Riley recounts his dream. At this time, Father Paul is reciting prayers, which makes him sick, and then he notices the mark of the cross on his hand. He cuts his hand and drinks his blood. Joe tries to talk himself out of buying alcohol, and he succeeds with great difficulty. At night, Father Paul holds an evening communion at the house of the doctor's elderly mother, Mildred, who recognizes him as Monsignor Pruitt. Meanwhile, Riley and Erin talk about their ideas of the afterlife and the basics of religion, after which they feel better. That same evening, Joe stops by Father Paul's house and witnesses Father Paul drinking communion wine. Joe looks at the portrait of Pruitt on the wall. Father Paul looks very much like him. The priest embraces Joe, who pulls away, falls, and smashes his head. Seeing the blood, the priest loses his mind and takes to drinking it. In the morning, Riley explains that his dream has changed, Erin has appeared in it, and the woman is sent to the mainland to another doctor. Meanwhile, Bev discovers Joe's dead body and exhausted Father Paul. She asks the mayor's wife to sing hymns, and she herself orders a couple of parishioners to dispose of the corpse. Bev believes that the priest's actions are justified and that his resurrection is a foreshadowing of Christ's second coming. At this time, Erin hears an expert opinion of the doctor, who doubts that the pregnancy was real. By evening, Father Paul feels good again. He holds an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting, explaining Joe's absence by his trip to see his sister. But Riley knows that this is not true and leaves the meeting confused. When he arrives home, he tells his mother about the priest's lies. At night, Father Paul is visited by Angel, who begins to fill the goblet with his blood, while Riley, determined to deal with it, returns to the recreation center. He opens the doors and is attacked by Angel. In the morning, Sarah's mother impresses her daughter with her blooming appearance, and the sheriff is approached by the mother of the missing dealer, who asks him to track down her son. Meanwhile, the parishioners are informed that the mass has been postponed until midnight due to Father Paul's illness, and the startled people view Mildred, who is considerably younger. Erin, concerned about Riley's sudden disappearance, files a missing persons report with the sheriff, but the latter suggests that Riley may have gone on a bench or committed suicide. At Good Friday Mass, Father Paul delivers a sermon replete with militaristic rhetoric, urging the congregation to prepare for war as soldiers in the Lord's army. This sermon upsets Mildred, who forbids her daughter to attend the church any further. At night, Erin is visited by Riley, who asks her to go in a boat with him. The woman agrees, even though she suspects something is amiss. After sailing far from the island, Riley recounts what has happened to him. After Angel's attack, he quickly recovered under Father Paul's care. When Riley tried to go outside, he was burnt and was forced to return and listen to the revelations of Father Paul. The priest is convinced that the angel's blood is a gift from God, and he mixes it into his communion wine to cure the people of Crockett Island of all illnesses. The priest also admitted that he had killed Joe, but according to him, the murder was justified. He also believes that the vampirism traits they both display are the grace of God, which Bev fully agrees with. Father Paul demonstrated to the boy his desire for blood as food, but reassured him that this would soon pass. Nevertheless, Riley is not ready to acknowledge what has happened as divine providence, while the priest reminds him of the fear of all who have seen miracles. Meanwhile, Bev brings Riley the goblet of the congregation's blood, and he drinks it. The priest releases Riley without listening to Bev's objections, for the man's rebirth is complete. Outside, Riley notices how his perception has changed. The colors are brighter and the air more saturated, and he witnesses a conversation between Mildred and his daughter. He visits his sleeping family before heading over to Erin's. Then they head out to sea, where he has nowhere to go. Riley confesses his love for Erin and asks the woman to flee the island. She reciprocates, but at this moment the dawn breaks. Riley sees in the boat the girl he killed in the accident. She smiles and takes his hand. Riley ignites and burns, turning to ash, and Erin screams in terror. The relatives find Riley's letters, while Erin returns to the island and tells Sarah about what is happening in the city. The doctor shows how her blood samples are vaporized by the sunlight and shows rejuvenated Mildred. At this time, Paul confesses to Bev that he senses Riley's death, but the woman reassures him that the boy, having received a great gift, has chosen his own path. She reminds him of Judah, who was also part of God's plan. Sarah shares with Aaron and Mildred her theory that Father Paul is spreading a miracle-creating virus through communion wine. This would also explain the missing pregnancy. After all, it is a foreign element in the body which the virus has decided to deal with dramatically. At this time, Ben brings his son's letters to Father Paul. He senses that something bad has happened. One of the letters is addressed to his father, and Ben asks him to give it to the Monsignor. After Ben leaves, Paul opens the letter and receives a quote, a reminder that they are all ashes, and to dust they shall return. And Aaron tries to tell Annie about Riley's death, but the angry woman throws her out, not wanting to believe the terrible news. Sarah informs the sheriff of her suspicions about what is happening in the church, but he refuses to take any action, not wanting to further aggravate relations with the locals, especially since he has already encountered unfair and prejudicial treatment. Aaron, Sarah, and Mildred decide to move to the mainland but find that the mayor has sent the ferries away for repairs and the fishing boats are almost all in need of repairs. During the night, the power and mobile network go out, which are also shut down by Bev's handmaidens. Aaron decides to go to the mass to see the danger for herself. Meanwhile, the sheriff allows his son to attend the midnight mass, and he asks his father to go with him. Before the mass begins, the townspeople make a procession around the island with candles and hymn singing. The service begins with Father Paul confessing to our lie. Then he confesses that he's Monsignor Pruitt. And today's the beginning of a new era for all of them because holy blood flows in their veins. He calls a parishioner and asks him to drink poison, to die and be reborn. The man drinks it and drops dead. When some people see this, they rush to the exit, but the angel in shining garb stands in the doorway. The creature reaches the dais and spreads his wings to the astonished gaps of the people, and then the dead man comes to life and gets to his feet. Bev and her assistants bring out cups of poison and hand them out to everyone present. The sheriff tries to take Ali away, but the boy pulls out his hand. He wants to stay with God. That is when the policeman pulls out his gun, but the congregation rushes at him and throws him to the floor. The boy, in spite of his father's screams, drinks the poison. Lisa's parents do the same, but the girl refuses. Unimaginable things are happening all around. Some are drinking the poison, the others are pushing the cups away. Then Mildred raises the sheriff's gun and shoots Father Paul in the head. A vampire attacks her and carries her away in his claws from the church. Bev orders the doors to be locked. Meanwhile, Ali comes back to life. The dead parishioners are resurrected as vampires and, hungry, attack those who have not drunk the poison. All hell breaks loose with screams and blood everywhere. Ed turns into a vampire and Sheriff Aaron, Lisa, Sarah, Warren, and Annie flee. But Bev gets in their way. Aaron shoots her, after which the group escapes. Father Paul regains consciousness while resurrected Bev and her assistants send vampires to attack the townspeople who are not present at the church. After the parishioners turned vampires have left the church, Father Paul is resurrected and, disappointed by the outcome of the mass, removes his robes and remains sitting alone on the steps of the altar of the bloody church, looking at Mildred, who has also turned. Screams can be heard in the town. The vampires are killing their loved ones and converting them. Meanwhile, the group of the runaways hide out in Aaron's house, pondering over a future plan of action. Warren recalls his canoe, which is hidden on the outskirts of the island, and Aaron realizes that the vampires needed the boats for something. She becomes terrified at the thought that some of the monsters might make it to the mainland. Suddenly, a burning bottle flies in through the window, setting the house on fire. It is Bev. She wants to settle the score with Aaron, who shot her. To allow the group to escape, Annie distracts the attackers by exposing Bev's motives. She is just jealous that God loves everyone without singling her out. Bev, who is always so right and so good, must be furious. Then Annie commits suicide by seducing the vampires with her blood. Meanwhile, John Pruitt recalls his affair with Mildred, which resulted in the birth of Sarah, who was forced to live with her fake father, as such circumstances were unacceptable for the pastor. The priest admits that the main reason for bringing Angel to the island was his desire to cure Mildred and live in peace with her and his daughter as a full family. The survivors decide to split up. The adults go to burn the boats prepared by the vampires to leave for the mainland to spread vampirism, while Lisa and Warren flee toward the peat bogs, where the younger Flynn's canoe is stored. Along the way, they encounter other vampires more than once, attacking innocent people who have not attended the midnight mass. Drunk on blood, Bev proposes not to extinguish the house, but instead to burn every building on the island, following the biblical story of the end of the world and the Ark, which will be the building of the rehabilitation center. She and her assistant go to burn the city, unaware that some converts who have not lost their reason and morals refuse to kill. Among them are Riley's parents, who find each other in the middle of the night. The sheriff, Aaron, and Sarah meanwhile set fire to the boats, and Lisa and Warren hide in an abandoned house, unaware that they have entered the lair of the beast. The girl lights a match and sees the angel drinking blood of the man dragged into the house. Lisa shoots the monster, but he's so engrossed in what he's doing that he doesn't even notice them. Then Lisa douses the room with fuel, and walking out the door they set fire to the house, but the angel breaks free and flies off into the night. At this time, Bev has already prepared a center for the converts to wait out the dawn and calls them out with the sound of a bell. She quotes statements about the Ark, but Pruitt abandons her idea and is unwilling to be the leader of the converts. Bev reports that the boats are burned, while Lisa and Warren mentally say goodbye to their families and get into their canoe. Bev takes command and throws the atheist convert out of the Ark, mocking his desire to save himself with the believers. Monsignor, on the other hand, invites the man to stay in the church, for God loves everyone regardless of their views, because everyone is worthy of salvation. But once inside the church, John sees Sarah, who is going to burn everything with kerosene and a lighter. He confesses that he's her father and regrets that he didn't get to know her better. But at that moment, one of Bev's underlings shoots Sarah. Enraged, Pruitt attacks him, wanting to kill him, but stops himself in time, remembering who he is and where he is. John tries to save Sarah and lets her drink his blood to turn her into a vampire, but she spits it back out, wanting to die human. John and Mildred mourn their daughter's death. They take her body, burn the church, and leave for the bridge by the river, a memorable place where Sarah often played as a child. Meanwhile, the walls of the rehab center are doused with kerosene by the surviving sheriff. Bev mocks the sheriff's religion and shoots him, and Aaron emerges from the building, spilling kerosene inside, but is picked up by a flying vampire, taking her aside and gnawing at her neck. But then Ali picks up the lighter and throws it into the building. Bev takes another shot at the sheriff, but his son rushes to the man and takes him away. Realizing that there are no more places to wait out the dawn, the converts disperse, wanting to spend their last moments with their loved ones. Slowly dying, Aaron shreds the wings of the blood-sucking vampire with a knife, after which the vampire struggles to rise into the air. He is spotted by Lisa and Warren, who are watching the shore from the boat, and they note the monster's slow speed and that he's unlikely to make it to the mainland before dawn. Aaron dies looking up at the stars and remembering Riley. Bev leaves to meet the dawn on the beach. The wounded sheriff and his son also go to the shore, where together they begin to pray, adhering to their native religion. Monsignor Pruitt and Mildred sit on the bridge holding Sarah's body. The father renounces the church and begs his beloved for forgiveness. Finally, dawn breaks. Ali burns in the sunlight, sitting by his father's dead body. Desperate, Bev tries to dig a shelter in the sand and burns up in hysterics. Riley's parents, in a crowd of similarly converted people, greet the dawn by singing hymns praising the Lord. All the islanders burn while Pruitt and Mildred kiss against the rising sun. The only survivors, Lisa and Warren, watch the fire. Suddenly, the girl confesses that she can no longer feel her legs. And that's the end of the series. Write in the comments what you think of this series. The year is 4032. Most of humanity has mutated into new creatures called abbeys. In the 21st century, Professor David Pilcher foresaw an unknown mutation in human DNA and built the town of Wayward Pines, which was meant to serve as an ark for the last surviving humans. The chosen ones, those who were destined to restore the human population, were frozen without their consent for 2,000 years. However, upon awakening, not everyone was pleased with life in a city surrounded by a tall fence with millions of monsters lurking outside. Dr. Theo Yedlin is on vacation at the beach. In a bar, he strikes up a conversation with a stranger who, at first glance, doesn't raise any suspicion. But the casual chat ends strangely. Yedlin wakes up several years later to find himself in the town of Wayward Pines. On his way to the hospital, accompanied by a group of strangers, Theo manages to escape. He seeks help at the first house he finds, hoping to call the police, but as he observes the strange behavior of the homeowners, Theo begins to doubt if he's doing the right thing. The police do respond to Yedlin's call, but instead of offering help, they return him to the hands of the strangers. They take Theo to the hospital, and after telling him a story about a government experiment, the people in black ask him to work for the good of society. The kidnappers ask Theo to save a patient who is extremely important to them. After examining the girl, Yedlin promises to do everything possible and instructs them to prepare the operating room while he assesses the seriousness of her injuries. Theo's patient turns out to be Kate. While the doctor operates on the girl, Carrie reports to Jason about losses within the ranks of the first generation. Looking at a photo of his rival, the dictator realizes that as long as Ben is free, their movement in the city are in danger. This is confirmed by Megan, who appears in the room. She reminds him of Pilcher's main rule: clear laws, strict punishment. Theo visits his patient, and she tries to tell him what's really going on. But Carrie doesn't allow the doctor to listen to Kate and instead urges him to take a break. While walking through the town, Theo witnesses soldiers separating a woman from her young son. The doctor tries to intervene but is once again prevented from understanding what's going on and is forced to walk away. However, later Yedlin does learn the woman's fate. She is brought to the central square along with others, accused of rebellion. Jason addresses the cheering crowd, assuring everyone that his cruelty is the path to humanity's salvation. After these words, he executes the woman without any explanation. Megan visits Kate in the hospital room and suggests they unite for the future of Wayward Pines. But Kate attacks her rival, armed with a scalpel. Kate confesses that she will never watch as dictators destroy the world. She raises the scalpel and ends her suffering. Mario brings Theo and other prisoners to the wall. He opens a passage and, after jamming the gas pedal with a rock, sends the vehicle into the lair of the Abbeys. The monsters notice the prey but run past, trying to climb over the fence. Members of the First Generation movement watch a motivational video left for them by Pilcher, followed by footage from surveillance cameras showing the Abbeys attempting to breach the wall. The creatures sacrifice themselves to create a ramp, allowing their comrades to infiltrate Wayward Pines. Jason realizes something is wrong and orders a squad to gather and check the situation in person. Meanwhile, the prisoners, led by Ben, try to escape from the vehicle, taking advantage of the fact that the monsters are ignoring them. Military vehicles approach the wall and soldiers open fire on the Abbeys. But despite this, some creatures manage to leap over the barrier and engage in open combat. The first to be injured is Carrie. An Abby slashes open her stomach, and Jason is forced to leave his subordinates to take his companion to the hospital. Very soon, the leader regrets his decision to get rid of Theo. No one is capable of performing the complex surgery and saving the girl. Jason orders the doctor to be found, and several vehicles must drive beyond the wall. Without resisting, Theo jumps into one of them to avoid falling into the hands of the advancing mutants. The leader of the movement asks Yedlin to perform the operation, but Theo refuses to proceed without an explanation of what's going on. Jason is forced to strike a deal with the doctor, promising to return his wife and revealing that aside from Wayward Pines, there are no other humans. The rest of the planet is overrun by Abbeys. After the surgery, Carrie regains consciousness. Another problem for the town arises: depleted supplies. Jason asks CJ to prepare for the harvest, which is beyond the wall, but the town must prepare carefully for the encounter with the Abbeys. Theo has to come to terms with his new role. He is appointed the head and most likely the only doctor in Wayward Pines. The only thing he disagrees with is the portrait of Pilcher hanging on the wall of his new office. Megan gives a lecture for the teenagers, using an Abbey body to show the mutants' weak points. One of the students admits he knows about the attempted breach, but Megan assures him that the only danger to the town is the rebels. Everything else is under control of the authorities. After examining one of the teenagers, Theo informs Jason of serious issues. Due to the food shortage, the health of the residents is at risk. However, the young dictator doesn't appreciate the doctor's tone or his attempts to change the order in Wayward Pines. CJ prepares a team for the harvest. He suggests using fire as protection against the Abbeys, and after a brief briefing, the vehicles drive beyond the wall to bring back the harvest and save the town. The monsters attack immediately as the harvesters appear, but CJ's plan works. The fire scares off the Abbeys, and the group has some time to gather food. One of the soldiers unexpectedly encounters Ben, but the young man refuses to help his old friend, fearing severe punishment for associating with a rebel. The loaded vehicles leave, and Ben doesn't manage to pass through the open gates. He then stands in front of the camera and addresses Jason, stating that all of the leader's actions are the wrong choice in tyranny. Rumors that Ben is still alive reach his mother. Teresa tries to find out details from the soldiers and persuade them to return for the boy, but no one wants to deal with the troublemakers. Ben continues to hide in the danger zone, hoping to return to Wayward Pines, but a pack of Abbeys attacks the boy, turning him into a hearty meal. Jason checks the cameras and notices that there are no Abbeys in any of the sectors. The leader celebrates, believing he has driven the monsters out and that the town is now completely safe. But it seems the mutants have a different opinion. Several soldiers are sent on a reconnaissance mission, but they spot nothing except a frightened deer. This pleases Jason greatly, as he is convinced the Abbeys have left, but Carrie sees an unpleasant side to this. If Ben isn't found, the leader will have to answer to the town for the death of one of the first generation. At night, voices are heard in Jason's house, and, loading his weapon, the young man goes downstairs. To his surprise, Pam appears before him. The old woman reminds her protege of everything she taught him. She confesses that she killed her brother only because he tried to save the town through dictatorship and violence. Pam asks Jason to let her stay and help him build a truly bright future and save humanity. Jason agrees to forgive the traitor and takes her to the square to announce his decision to the town. Unbeknownst to Jason, Pam sneaks into the lab where the captured Abbeys are kept. Megan arrives shortly after, but the thief manages to leave without revealing her intentions for coming there. Back at home, Pam plans to use a drug she stole from the lab. Her plan is interrupted by Theo's arrival, but the nurse quickly directs him to the door to get what she came for in the hated town. Megan learns of the stolen drug, but it turns out it wasn't a medicine. Pam had taken a smallpox sample. Meanwhile, Pam attends a meeting in Jason's office. She unexpectedly kisses her protege in a way she never had before and joins the conversation. Dr. Yedlin bursts into the room. He orders everyone to leave without touching anything and avoiding contact with people. The doctor then reveals Pam's plans, and the woman doesn't even attempt to resist. Pam admits that, in her opinion, Wayward Pines should be destroyed. She asks Jason to put an end to the story, but the leader orders the traitor to be arrested. At night, Jason goes on a walk with Pam. He asks his mentor to tell him the end of the story about Wayward Pines, but after receiving an answer that wounds his pride, the dictator kills the old woman. A few days after the Abbey attack, Xander finally wakes up at the bottom of a deep well. There, the young man is found by a mutant, but he manages to defeat the monster and climb to the surface. At a meeting on the problems of Wayward Pines, CJ discusses the need to increase the area of crops. The population is growing, but food is becoming scarcer. Carrie and Megan believe it's too early to address this issue, but Jason supports the farmer and allows him to search for new fields. Xander is quietly approached by a man with a knife. He demands that Xander reveal who sent him and who currently rules the town. The savage himself says he has been here for a very long time. He is the only one from the team Pilcher sent to search for other survivors. Guards notice movement near the wall, and a duty squad is dispatched to the scene. The soldiers recognize Xander, accompanied by the stranger, but let them inside without question. The savage is immediately sent to Dr. Yedlin. Theo tries to find out from the patient if there are other people beyond the wall, but the man only says that the Abbeys are not the enemy. They are the replacement meant to take their place. Jason learns the name of the savage, Adam Hassler. He asks the doctor to tell him everything the patient said, but Theo refuses to disclose the confidential information and suggests the leader speak to the survivor personally. Throughout this time, Hassler struggles to recover. He is constantly haunted by nightmares of Abbey attacks he endured during his months beyond the wall. Finally, the man can no longer take it and decides to leave the hospital, fearing that the mutants will get to him there. The savage escapes into the streets, frightening crowds of townspeople. His hallucinations, in which mutants attack him, intensify, forcing him to find shelter in a deserted alley. There, Adam is discovered by Teresa. She recognizes an old acquaintance and tries to find out if he has seen Ben, but the savage hesitates to tell the woman the truth. Theo tells his wife about Adam's words, and Rebecca urges him to inform the town's leadership. The town sends off the first group, who go in search of new lands suitable for settlement and cultivation. Teresa stops CJ's vehicle and asks to join the mission so she can find her son. Hassler also joins the soldiers, having failed to adjust to the peaceful life in town. CJ gazes with excitement at the landscape he hasn't seen in a very long time. He orders the squad to set up camp and prepares for a night outside the wall. Adam leaves without explanation, but later that night he returns, causing a stir in the camp. Hearing the commotion, Rachel wakes up and the soldiers part to reveal what the savage has brought. On the ground lies a covered body, and even before she removes the covering, it becomes clear that Ben is underneath it. Rebecca brings Lucy, the girl she's trying to protect from the harsh rules of Wayward Pines, into her home. Upon learning that the girl is to be placed in the breeding program, Theo becomes furious and supports his wife's decision. Frank, Lucy's brother, feels responsible for her rule-breaking. He escapes from the academy and goes for an evening walk, but in the city center he faces a greater shock. An Abby appears on the town's carousel. The mutant stands tall before the boy, and this is caught on surveillance cameras. Jason orders the main streets to be cordoned off and makes sure no one finds out what's happening. Several armed men come to the boy's aid, but Carrie asks the leader not to destroy this creature. It is the first female Abby they have encountered. Despite attempts to keep the incident a secret, Frank becomes a school hero. Megan studies the new creature and reports to the leadership about the behavioral differences. According to the scientist, the female is much calmer than her counterparts, and the other captive Abbies have also become more peaceful since her arrival. The doctor also shows the Abby's palm. It bears a strange pattern, unlike any scars. Megan believes this pattern might help them learn more about the mutants and eventually eradicate them. A search of the city yields no results. No other creatures are found, nor are there any breaches in the wall. No one can explain how the female managed to enter the city or why she did so. The only explanation that comes to Jason's mind is that the Abbies may have accomplices among the population. Jason turns to Rebecca for help. She designed the city and may know the way the Abby got inside. Upon learning that a new Abby has appeared in the lab, Theo requests access to the research. Carrie agrees, but she warns the doctor that not all group members will like this. Naturally, Carrie is referring to Megan. The scientist makes every effort to appear satisfied with the doctor's presence, but she disobeys all of Yedlin's orders and conducts experiments that could harm the mutant. The Abbies have quickly learned the lesson with fire. After making torches, they surround the cornfield and set it ablaze. The creature in the lab at that moment feels everything that is happening to its pack. Several years before the current events, unaware that a human invasion is imminent, the Abby tribe enjoys a peaceful life deep in the forest. But suddenly a helicopter appears over the mutants' camp, and most of the tribe is wiped out. Only a few survive, with no other choice but to seek revenge. In the city, a siren blares, and panic begins. At the same time, the Abbies set another field on fire, knowing that by doing this, they are depriving humans of any chance of survival. Adam is the first to notice the mutants approaching. He raises the alarm and orders the squad to move to a safe place, but it's already too late. The first creatures infiltrate the camp, and one of them attacks Teresa. Megan, unaware of anything, works on reports in the lab. She is only distracted when the Abbies start banging on their cages, and the close proximity no longer feels safe. Theo learns that the food fields are burning. At that moment, Carrie arrives and asks the doctor to return to the hospital and prepare for a difficult night. Jason sends out several dozen vehicles, all civilian men, or to extinguish the fields, while the military protects them from Abby attacks. Realizing how this will end, Theo orders his colleagues to prepare all available beds and be ready to receive not tens but hundreds of patients. The battlefield truly becomes a nightmare. The Abbies are far more clever and resourceful. There's no one left to extinguish the fields. Soldiers fall before they can even reach them, suffering severe injuries from the mutants. Within an hour, the hospital turns into chaos. The screams of patients mix with the bustle of medical staff who are not prepared for such an onslaught. Theo tries to help everyone, but he cannot save them all, and many patients die in the hands of frightened interns. CJ recounts how the Abbies attack the camp and everyone trying to extinguish the fire. But Carrie and Megan don't believe the farmer's words. They are convinced the mutants have no intelligence and thus could not have had a plan. Jason sides with the women. He is more concerned about the fate of the harvest, but CJ has no good news. All the fields have been burned, and in less than 6 weeks the city will fall to starvation. The food shortage is not the only threat. Theo informs the leader that there is a critical shortage of medicine, and soon people will begin to die from simple colds or minor cuts. Yedlin doesn't hold back in his critique, saying that Pilcher was an idiot. In creating his own world, he failed to consider the basics. Jason's thoughts are interrupted by news that around 100 Abbies have gathered near the wall. Despite the obvious situation, the leader refuses to admit that the mutants are evolving and the advantage has long been on their side. Teresa spends several hours in intensive care, but her heart gives out, and the last thing the woman sees is her son and husband, with whom she will finally reunite. Megan performs an MRI on the Abby, and looking at the monitor, Theo sees a surprising result. The part of the brain responsible for thinking and problem-solving is twice the size of a human's. The Abby's roar echoes throughout the city. The monitor shows that several thousand mutants have gathered near the wall. The creatures locked in the cages respond to their kin, but the female remains remarkably calm. After a conversation with Adam, Theo examines the female Abby's hand and discovers the pattern. He becomes furious that Megan hadn't told him about the design, but the scientist doesn't understand the significance at this moment. The doctor asks Megan not to interfere while he tries to establish contact with the Abby. In Theo's opinion, it's the only way to find out what the mutants want and save the city. Yedlin shows the mutants several cards with pictures and tries to explain their meaning. CJ had been one of those who woke up from cryosleep every 100 years to observe changes on Earth. During one such outing, the botanist met a strange young man. He still resembled a human, but had peculiar features. The stranger rambled, ate raw fish, and suffered from unknown ailments. CJ couldn't shake the new companion. The young man demanded to be taken with him and cared for. To avoid risking the others, CJ eliminated the threat. Theo asked Megan to offer the Abbey a treat, but the mutant points towards its kin. This confirms the doctor's theory. She is not just an intelligent creature. She is a leader who cares for her pack. Adam bursts into the lab, demanding that the scientists release the female. He claims that she is the leader of the Abbeys, and her followers are gathering near the wall, ready to do anything to save their leader. A heated argument erupts among the group. Megan is convinced that Adam is overestimating the importance of the mutant, while Theo believes the leader's presence could help them negotiate with the creatures and save the city. Memories take CJ back to the day he woke up and roused the others. Pilcher, the founder of the project, was confident that mutations had ended several hundred years ago and that they were now facing only an empty, uninhabited Earth. But the scientist was wrong. The first walk in the forest revealed strange creatures vaguely resembling humans. Pilcher didn't even attempt to make contact. He also refused to return to cryosleep and slumber for several more centuries. The only thing that occurred to the professor was to declare the mutants enemies, build a city, and fence it off with a tall, electrified wall. Theo tries to communicate with the female Abby, but Jason arrives at the lab. Like Megan and his predecessor, Pilcher, the leader of the first generation, refuses to seek a peaceful solution, convinced that the remaining humans will prevail against the thousands of creatures at the fence. The argument goes in circles, but Yedlin reminds everyone that the lives of all the city's residents are at stake. Dr. Yedlin explains to the Abbey that Jason is their leader, but the female mutant disagrees. She shows the doctor that he should be the leader of the town. This infuriates the young dictator, and he tries to stop the experiment, but Theo stands his ground. Signaling that he means no harm, Theo unlocks the cage of a male Abbey and tries to enter, but the aggressive mutant doesn't share the doctor's optimism and grabs his arm. On one hand, this frightens everyone present, but on the other, they see the female giving a signal, and the monsters obey her. In Theo's opinion, everything went perfectly, but Jason thinks otherwise. Before the leader's eyes, he kills the males and plans to eliminate her as well. Theo wrestles the gun from the madman, and Carrie tries to convince him not to argue with the others. She asks her friend to leave and think things over while the doctor continues his experiments. Megan notices a crimson puddle beneath her and feels unwell. The last thing she sees is the freed female Abby behind her. At the moment when Theo was unlocking the code, the creature memorized the combination and easily repeated it. The city's residents are assured that nothing dangerous is happening and that they can continue their normal lives. But Theo returns to the lab and realizes that things are far from normal. He discovers Megan's body in the empty cage of the female Abby. At the same time, the mutant sneaks towards the exit. Jason arrives at the scene. He orders the building to be searched, unwilling to admit that he is responsible for what happened. The soldiers search every corner of the hospital, including the underground passages, but it's already pointless. The mutant is running through the forest, making her way to her kind. Suddenly, the Abbey slips off a cliff, but she manages to collect herself and lands unharmed. Dr. Yedlin insists that they must warn the townspeople. If the female Abbey reaches the exit, she will likely open it for thousands of her kin. But Jason stubbornly holds his ground. He plans to send unarmed townsfolk to search for the creature and fight the other Abbeys. The town's school children are locked in the school building. The other residents are also informed of the Abbey's escape and are ordered to lock themselves in their homes to avoid encountering the creature. The Abbey hides in the forest and notices Frank and Lucy walking by. She also sees a couple in love, but she doesn't attack the teenagers, trying to avoid detection. After this, the monster heads straight for the city and attacks one of the soldiers who participated in the hunt. The scream of the unfortunate soldier echoes throughout Wayward Pines, warning the residents of the danger. The Abbey takes the body of its victim with it. Soldiers spot the Abbey on the rooftops of houses. They open fire, but once again the monster manages to escape. The mutant continues to toy with the people, appearing in different locations. All those with any kind of weapon are called in to join the search. Xander gathers a small team, hoping to track down the Abbey. Theo and Adam also set out in search of the mutant, but all they find is the body of a soldier, which the creature dragged away. The hunters realize it was a trap. The Abbey lured them into the forest so they wouldn't interfere with her final tasks in the city. Armed citizens flood the streets, but the abbey manages to evade them, remaining unnoticed. This leads to frightened hunters firing at each other, solving the mutants' problems for her. Finding several bodies and shooters in the street, Theo tries to de-escalate the situation. He asks a young woman to let the soldiers go so they can take their comrade to the hospital. The number of red dots on the monitor rapidly increases, indicating the number of abbeys near the wall. Jason shows Carrie the bunker designed especially for them. He confesses to her that this shelter would allow them not only to survive but also to enter cryosleep for as long as needed to eventually restore Earth. However, Carrie is forced to admit to her boyfriend that after the abbey's attack, she cannot have children, and there's no point in wasting a capsule on her. Rebecca encounters the abbey in the middle of the city, but before the monster can attack, Xander injures the mutant, protecting his fiancée and their future child. Breathing a sigh of relief, the couple hurries to the wall to find weak spots and fix them. Xander remembers the pit, and the group theorizes that it might be a tunnel leading into the city. The wounded female abbey flees into the forest and finds an entrance to such a tunnel. She prepares to leave the city, but Adam appears behind her, intent on killing the mutant. The female abbey straightens up, and fear flashes in her eyes. Seeing this, the hunter lets her go to her kind. Adam also enters the tunnel, determined to end this once and for all. Jason's squad finds a pipe from which the wild cries of the mutants can be heard. The leader orders the passage to be blown up, hoping this will stop the wild mutants. Adam manages to escape from the other side of the tunnel, but there, he is met by a crowd of wild, hungry abbeys. However, the female with the pattern on her hand does not allow them to harm the man who saved her life and helped her escape. Hassler walks past unharmed. Despite the return of the leader, the crowd of abbeys does not leave the area around the fence. The abbey leader reaches the camp and is taken in by caring elders, remembering all those who became victims of humanity. Observing the abbeys, Carrie sees that the escaped female is getting worse, and her kin gather around to say their goodbyes. But Jason is not moved by this news. He sees no tragedy in the death of an ordinary mutant. Realizing that all the city's problems are caused by the dictator's stubbornness, Theo decides to address the issue and turns to Xander for help, but the men don't have time to discuss things. CJ invites the doctor to an important meeting with Jason. The leader offers two options: surrender and accept their end, or go back into cryosleep. The female abbey's condition worsens, but her kin don't abandon her. They treat her wound and do everything they can to keep their leader alive. Jason addresses the townspeople, tells them about the abbey invasion, and gives instructions for the evacuation. This causes unrest, but CJ steps in to calm everyone down, assuring them that the process is completely safe. After giving several lectures, CJ heads to the control center to check the equipment, but the plan is under threat. The program encounters a loading error. CJ informs Jason of the issue, insisting that the capsules need to be recharged, but there is hardly any time left, and the leader will have to choose who gets to leave the danger zone first. To make the right decision, Jason asks Dr. Yedlin to check all the citizens' profiles and assess their health on a 5-point scale. Theo dislikes this idea and suggests using a lottery to choose the lucky ones, but Jason insists that only those valuable for reproduction should remain in the end. Yedlin decides to use Carrie. He tells her that Jason has decided to leave her to be torn apart by the abbeys because of her inability to have children. The doctor convinces her of his truth and suggests she eliminate the traitor. Many years ago, while planning the construction of a new world, David Pilcher adopted a child to make him the heir to everything. But before signing the papers, the professor meets the boy's mother, Carrie. She was the one who gave her son to the professor, who later named him Jason. While flipping through his fiancée's personal file, Jason finds a secret folder where he discovers that his fiancée is actually his biological mother. At that very moment, Carrie enters the room. The calm conversation escalates into a scuffle and a fight. Finally, a gunshot is heard in the room. Jason recalls the first time he saw Carrie, how she was introduced to the new world, and how he promised she would always be safe. But now the once-in-love young people are on the floor, in pools of crimson. As Jason fades, Carrie takes his hand to stay by his side. The female abbey regains consciousness and signals to her kin, gathering them around her. Jason is brought to the hospital, and Theo prepares him for surgery. Meanwhile, in the forest, the abbeys are preparing for a final assault on the city. The residents are being prepared for evacuation into cryocapsules, but most townspeople linger around the hospital, waiting for news about their leader. After several hours of surgery, Theo announces Jason's death to everyone. The doctor assures the people that the plan remains unchanged. They will all be saved soon. CJ hands Dr. Yedlin the list Jason had made. He suggests following the old plan to avoid panic and save precious time. Registration for the capsules begins, and the first to enter are women and children. Those not on the first list are asked to wait at home for their turn, but many suspect they will never be called. Even among the children, there are excess. One of these extras is Frank, who had once openly told Theo that he didn't want to have children. Xander also doesn't receive an invitation. He realizes this is Yedlin's personal revenge for taking his wife. The closer the Abbeys get to the fence, the more aggressive they become. Their movements are watched by the female leader, standing above the rest. Watching the screen, Theo realizes that the fence is on the verge of being breached. The doctor decides to record one last message for future generations in which he urges humanity not to repeat David Pilcher's experiments. Such endeavors only lead to dire consequences. To somehow fix the situation, Dr. Yedlin plans to inject himself with 3 strains of dangerous viruses involuntarily surrendered to the Abbeys. This is how he intends to wipe out the terrible mutant species. Those who didn't get a place in the capsules begin to panic and search for alternative ways out. Riots break out in the city. Only Xander and Frank calmly accept their fate, sitting in a small street bar. Theo arrives to pick up the boys and take them to the departure point, but the road is blocked by 2 young men with a burning bottle and a firm decision to steal the car. Xander manages to calm the boys down, and the group leaves. On the way, Theo picks up another passenger, his intern Arlene. Yedlin returns to the lab to inject himself with the virus strains and head for the wall. But there he is met by Carrie, who asks to take on this mission herself. After Jason's death and the news that he was her son, she no longer wants to run from her fate. Learning that she has already injected herself with the viruses, Theo agrees to leave with the others. As a parting gesture, he gives her one more vial, which will numb her pain during the encounter with the Abbeys. Before the capsules are launched, Theo wishes the travelers a safe journey. He admits that he doesn't know what awaits them in the future, but hopes it will be better than the present. People take their places as the city slowly comes to a standstill in the face of danger. CJ is supposed to be the last to take his place, but his capsule malfunctions and the man sees his wife, who has been dead for several hundred years. Nevertheless, CJ decides to stay behind, hoping that one day he can change the world. Carrie opens the wall and steps outside the city, into the land where the Abbeys will live for many centuries. And so the series ends. A man named Kevin suddenly comes to in some alleyway. His face is battered, he doesn't remember how or when he got here, and how long he's been unconscious. Suddenly, he sees a stranger in front of him who introduces himself as Benefactor. The new acquaintance claims he can help him and offers the man a job. Kevin refuses, remembering he needs to go home to his wife. Then Benefactor explains that no accident occurred in this world. Calling the police is futile, and they have met far from the first time, because Kevin has shifted to another reality. Benefactor leads the man to a cafe where it seems everyone knows him. Waitress Tina escorts them to the chosen table, although she cannot hide her fear. After a tense conversation at the table, Kevin realizes that Benefactor is actually Satan. The devil mocks Kevin's faith in God, proposing to discuss his marriage when Tina brings the ordered dish. Benefactor orders her to sit next to them, forces her to eat a piece of food, though she is trembling, and continues the conversation about Kevin's wife, Molly, with whom he had argued in the morning over paying bills. The man doesn't remember this, so Benefactor clarifies that an incident looks different from different sides, because for every choice made by a person, there are countless realities where the choice was different. A choice generates endless possibilities, and therefore realities. And everything a person can imagine in their mind exists somewhere in some time. Therefore, there is a force that can transfer people between realities, swap people with doppelgangers from another planet Earth, shuffle them. That's precisely what Benefactor does. He has already replaced Kevin's wife, Molly, multiple times. The first time was when Kevin gave her a silly pendant, which Molly's copy threw away. Kevin doesn't believe this nonsense and demands proof. Then Benefactor offers to shift someone. For instance, Tina. Benefactor adjusts some device on his wrist while Tina starts to cry, apparently genuinely frightened. Looking back, Kevin sees her weeping parents and regrets subjecting them to such an ordeal. And when he screams for Benefactor to stop, the girl disappears. The devil explains that she ended up in a world where her parents never met, and thus she was never created. So now the poor girl is in a psychiatric clinic. Kevin doesn't understand why Satan needs him, and he admits he's ready to offer the man anything he wants, provided he becomes one of his shifters, people who have sold their souls and transfer others to alternative universes. Other Kevins made their choice, so only he remains. In desperation, Kevin begins to pray silently for God's help. Benefactor furiously screams, claiming he is undoubtedly better than God and he will never leave Kevin alone. And the more furiously Benefactor curses, the more fervently Kevin prays until suddenly Satan disappears, leaving Kevin in this reality. Horrified at what he has just done, Kevin apologizes to Tina's family and leaves. But stepping outside, he finds the world has changed. Police and strange masks are everywhere and there are bans on virtually everything. 5 years later, Kevin is still in this reality, where most of the planet is destroyed by a constant war, after which the shifters came. At first they operated secretly, moving between alternative universes and expelling everyone who was inconvenient to the totalitarian regime. Billions of people disappeared, but then came Benefactor, who took away people's hope and faith. This is where he wanted to recruit helpers until Kevin arrived. It was after that illegal prayer that he was declared wanted as Kevin, who refused to work for the devil. After that, Benefactor tried 7 times to make him accept the offered terms, but Kevin consistently refused, enduring physical torments for it. Kevin bandages his numerous abrasions, listening to the Vika Theater advertisement, where anyone can see their doppelganger from another reality, and pondering rumors that the shifters have left this world. No one knows who the shifters are, as they freely walk between worlds and can take any appearance. Kevin's great desire was to obtain their devices for moving between universes, which they wore on their wrists, because then he would have the opportunity to return to his own world. Meanwhile, he goes to work, where he has only one friend, Gabriel. After work, the man goes to the city gray slums, where the majority of the population lives. People here have nothing, not even hope. Kevin tries to do what he can and help whomever he can. The Holy Scripture is banned, but Kevin memorizes as much of the Bible as possible and distributes it through his friend Gabriel. And he constantly remembers his wife and the birth of his son. But all happy dreams about them end in a nightmare. One day, Gabriel wonders if it was worth expelling Benefactor like that, if Kevin never received any divine assistance. Maybe there was never a God. Kevin reminds him of the scripture pages, but he doesn't believe in the possibility of a coming. After such a conversation, Kevin goes to the Vika Theater, whose owner he knows. Russo has been unsuccessfully searching for his lost cat for a long time and is not very happy about the man's arrival, but still allows him to participate in the session. People used to simply want to see themselves happy and came here to forget the bad, but now everyone orders a reality for viewing where they are humiliated and beaten even more than in real life on this planet. Russo doesn't control the visions, he just turns on the equipment. This time he hands Kevin the remote, warning him that his visions are limited by the number of his doppelgangers. And the man starts the session, hoping to see his Molly. He sees himself as a gangster, then a lover, a prisoner, an alcoholic, and suddenly Molly appears on the screen. Kevin jumps up and the session immediately ends. Russo doesn't believe he managed to find his wife, but he still sets a new session time. The man leaves and finds himself in a crowd restrained by police. It turns out, after a long absence, Benefactor has arrived in this world, and the police are shooting everyone without trial who causes disturbances. Gabriel pulls his friend from under fire, and the pair hides in an abandoned house. In the evening, Kevin goes to the store and suddenly remembers how their son disappeared when they went shopping and got distracted talking to friends. The child wandered off and vanished without a trace. Their family couldn't withstand this blow. They started to argue, and Molly became addicted to alcohol. That's when he gave her the medallion with the resurrection symbol, but Molly threw it away. The man runs away and meets his neighbor, who invites him over, introducing him to his wife and 2 daughters. But when Kevin is about to leave, the neighbors suddenly detain him because they recognize Kevin, who refused to sell his soul to the devil. And when he denies it, the girls sing a church hymn for him, bringing Kevin to tears. The neighbors want to know anything about God, and the man recounts to them the parable of Job. Suddenly an alarm sounds, and turning on the TV, people learn about Benefactor's arrival for another recruitment of Kevin. Citizens selected for this mission must arrive at a specified place under threat of death. In the morning, Kevin goes to Russo's Vika Theater again. Russo is frightened by Benefactor's return and lets the man in very reluctantly. Russo is upset. His cat has been missing for 4 years, and he thinks she will never return, although hope still flickers. Kevin sits in the chair and summons visions, and suddenly he sees Molly again. But in this world, she lives with her mother and a little daughter, and on her chest hangs a pendant with the resurrection symbol. Kevin realizes that this is his real Molly, but Russo doesn't know how to find her, especially since Kevin doesn't have a device for moving between universes. Then the man goes to Gabriel and acquires illegal firearms from him, intending to force Benefactor to return him to his former life in the old reality. The next day he sees Benefactor recruiting another newbie in a cafe, but the street is cordoned off and it's impossible to get closer. Waiting until the police are distracted by a fight, Kevin runs into the cafe, but upon bursting inside, he finds himself in his room. He doesn't understand what happened and goes outside, but immediately armed police confront him and the guy returns to his room. He tries a few more times to get to the cafe, but they open fire on him. In despair, Kevin throws away the gun and turns to God, but instead, Benefactor and Gabriel, who denies knowing Kevin, appear in the room. Satan mocks the foolish man who entrusts his writings to some coward. Kevin is still waiting for the coming, but he is not needed by God, and he will never come to him. So he can live well only by coming to Benefactor. Satan also refuses to talk about Kevin's missing son and admits that among all the doppelgangers, only he refused to cooperate. Outside, a scream is heard, and dashing out the door, Kevin sees a police officer shooting his neighbor. Then they open fire on his room. Kevin falls, dropping Gabriel, but the friend is already dead. And then Kevin sees on his hand the device for moving between universes and realizes that he has been one of Benefactor's minions all this time. He removes the device and instantly shifts to another reality, but around him is a desert. Kevin activates the device again and falls into a lake, emerging from which he again realizes that this is not his world. And again, he activates the device. In one of the realities, he ends up in a psychiatric clinic where several shifters with Gabriel's face greet him. He tries to run away from them, but they open fire. Kevin hides, and in one of the rooms, he suddenly sees Tina, who recognizes the man and asks to be returned home to her family. He activates the device for moving again and finds himself in the home of his doppelganger, who accepted Benefactor's offer. Recognizing Kevin, who refused to sell his soul, the doppelganger points a gun at him and tries to take the device. But Kevin manages to shift back to his bullet-riddled apartment. Kevin sees his neighbor being taken away by an ambulance as passers-by recognize him. The man has to run to Russo's Vika Theater. He sits in the chair, finds Molly, and enters the coordinates of her reality into his device. And immediately he finds himself in a large store where his wife is walking with friends. He cries from happiness at seeing her, but the woman reminds him that the collapse of their marriage was initiated by him. She has found someone else and is happy. Then he sees his pendant and admits that he believes in the possibility of restoring their past relationship. Suddenly, Benefactor returns Kevin to the totalitarian universe in Russo's Vika Theater, and right there next to him is Tina. Satan shows Kevin Molly crying after their meeting and reminds him that he can still bring her back. But in the corner, a broken Tina is weeping, and only Kevin can decide whom and where to return. Benefactor delivers a speech about God, who always lies, promising but fulfilling nothing and allowing such terrible things to be done to people. And suddenly Russo hears the meowing of his cat. She has indeed returned. Kevin laughs at this and remembers all the good that exists in this world, and he decides to give Tina back her life, foregoing personal happiness. Tina's parents embrace their newly found daughter, and Benefactor grabs a gun and points it at Kevin, but as soon as Kevin forgoes personal temptations, that is, frees himself from the shackles of Satan who eternally tempts people, he is instantly transferred to a reality where Molly is a nurse and a single mother whom he had seen before. He strikes up a conversation, repeating their first meeting, and they fall in love and marry again. He accepts her daughter as his own and later plays with their newborn son. In the epilogue, Kevin says that although this is not his universe, it is now his home, where he has received twice as much as he lost. Inexpensive, but well-written, directed and acted science fiction that turns out to be more of a mystical drama with a religious message. The film is full of allusions to the Bible and direct quotes from the Book of Job, and the conclusion is made in the spirit of this parable. But who said that hope is a bad thing? 1967. Upon landing on Earth, after completing their mission, the Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 1, with cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov on board, tragically perishes. Many years later, under the leadership of the Swedish billionaire Meyer, an expedition to Mars is being prepared. After 10 months, the crew of the spaceship Ulysses reaches the Red Planet. The captain informs the team that they have received permission to land and asks the ship's AI, named Irene, to verify everything required for a soft landing. At this time, Meyer reveals that he spent 4 years preparing for this journey, sacrificing almost all his money for it. However, the American company Zillion beat them to it by landing 2 weeks ago. The problem is that Earth has received no news from the American crew, except for one video in which they ask not to come to Mars. A dispute arises among the crew members, but the captain declares that the landing will occur in any case, and people disperse to their cabins. With 30 minutes left until landing, AI Irene begins preparations. However, an unforeseen event occurs. The ship does not detach from the carrier system, posing a threat to the entire crew. The only way out is to perform the separation manually. The commander ventures into space and struggles to free the attachments, but at that moment, the shuttle enters Mars's atmosphere, throwing the captain into open space. The shuttle almost crashes onto Mars as a system error causes a power outage. Now, they can only rely on manual landing. AI Irene goes into sleep mode, and the astronauts still manage to land on Mars. They succeeded, but their fuel is depleted, and Irene does not restart. Without the onboard computer and life support system, they have only a day to survive. Alessandra mourns her deceased husband when she sees a figure in a spacesuit through the window. After diagnosing the ship, it becomes apparent that too much fuel was consumed during the landing, and now the ship cannot return to orbit. The only option is to wait for the solar panels to power the generators, but there's a storm on the surface, and it will take 2 days, time they don't have. At this point, Simon mentions the American ship, Zeta 1, which beat them by 2 weeks. It likely crashed, but there are probably batteries left. The rover sets out on a journey while those remaining on the ship try to restart the system. Engineer Basil recalls that the AI has an energy-saving function. He initiates a reboot, but Irene doesn't start. At this time, the rover finds the wreckage of the American spacecraft and one surviving solar panel, but there is no sign of the American crew. The astronauts head back but spot an unconscious person in a spacesuit. Despite their ship running low on oxygen, Jana insists on transporting the person. Nearby, they find the black box from the American spacecraft. The team arrives at the ship, but Jan refuses to let them inside, stating that 4 survivors are better than 8 corpses, so he won't open the doors. Alessandra tries to persuade the man when the discovered astronaut wakes up, and at that moment, AI Irene activates and opens the doors. Upon examination, the found astronaut knows nothing about the American crew, as he is Vladimir Komarov, a Soviet cosmonaut born in 1927 in Moscow, carrying out the orders of the USSR government. He doesn't know how he ended up here but is not willing to reveal any secrets. Komarov confidently answers questions that are consistent with his time, raising the suspicion that he may have post-traumatic stress disorder. The astronauts send a message to Earth and receive a response from the American corporation, Zillion, stating that there were no Russians in their mission. The crew of the Ulysses spaceship tries to make sense of the situation. How could Komarov, who died in 1967, end up on Mars after all these years? Is he a time traveler or an extraterrestrial? The psychologist is tasked with questioning Komarov first, and he confesses that he is hungry. Jana goes to get food while the others try to understand what has actually happened. Basil suggests the idea that Komarov was waiting for them. Meanwhile, Vladimir is eating the food brought by Jana when the woman confesses that he died 50 years ago and his family buried him long ago. Komarov takes this news rather calmly. In the meantime, the state of the ship, although it has reached stability, remains unreliable because the engines do not work and there is no fuel. So, leaving is impossible. The crew continues to keep an eye on Komarov, but he behaves calmly until he suddenly disappears. Simon searches the ship, but it yields no results. That's when the people discover that his spacesuit is missing. A part of the crew follows the heat trail tracked by Irene. The group, led by Simon, leaves the rover and continues on foot when Alessandra reports that Komarov's DNA analysis showed the presence of a third strand. He is not human. And then they catch up with Komarov, who leads them to an unfamiliar structure with a small stone pyramid on it and tells Jana that Mars has been waiting for them for a very long time. At the same time, Goldstein, the founder of the Zillion Corporation, whose ship was the first to arrive on Mars, is informed about the discovery of a person on the Red Planet who couldn't have gotten there naturally, suggesting that he was created on site. However, only AI could survive for such a long time on a hostile planet for humans. This implies the need for further study. Meanwhile, Komarov cannot explain how he opened the door and found himself in the location where they discovered him. AI, Irene conducts an analysis of the structure and determines that it is identical to Earth structures from ancient civilizations. It means that someone was inspired by human civilization, or humans borrowed these elements from extraterrestrials. The ship's crew increasingly ponders whether they will be able to return home when they notice the landing of Goldstein's second ship. Soon, the captain of the ship, Gemma, establishes contact and promises to help them return to Earth. However, Meyer does not trust Goldstein and advises hiding Komarov from competitors. Jana brings Komarov a uniform so that he does not stand out when the visitors arrive, and he requests that they trust him. Shortly, two armed military personnel, Edward and Adam, arrive on their ship and behave rather aggressively. Edward demands that they hand over the black box from the Zeta-1 ship and, not hearing agreement, orders his partner to search the ship. Meyer hands over the found black box and they depart. Meanwhile, chemist Eva reports that the stone found on Mars consists of an alloy that does not exist on Earth. However, it is known from ancient sources and was once called orichalcum, the metal of Atlantis. In addition to copper, zinc, nickel, and iron, it contains a third strand of DNA, similar to Komarov's. Meyer warns that if Goldstein learns about this, he will take the cosmonaut back. The crew is divided into those willing to exchange him for fuel and those who are willing to stay but want to know the truth. Jana invites Vladimir into her cabin and asks for permission to use hypnosis. He agrees, and the psychologist begins her work. The rest of the crew listens to the conversation via transmission. However, Komarov only shares the final moments on the Soyuz spacecraft before its demise. During this time, Gemma and Alan arrive on the ship and apologize for the actions of the military, and express their readiness to help fix all the malfunctions. Jana remembers her conversation with Komarov, who laments the future of Earth due to humanity's irresponsible behavior. In the meantime, it is revealed that the billionaire Meyer did not plan the flight just for the sake of it. 4 years ago, the rover sent a photo to Earth of the found stele, and he confesses that they found a stone with unknown DNA. Gemma explains that it's an information storage system that can be rewritten. Upon hearing these words, AI Irene activates and deciphers the message on the stone. It's a series of numbers. At this time, the hesitant Jan leads a mutiny. He doesn't trust Meyer, who warned them about Zillion. But now, the Americans have come to their aid, and their leader, as it turns out, concealed the true purpose of the flight. He is ready to switch sides to Goldstein, who is willing to do whatever it takes to combat his terminal illness. Later, engineer Basil informs Meyer that Komarov is the same kind of program as the stone they found, but the most crucial revelation is that he deciphered a copy of the black box from Zeta-1, which shows that the oxygen on the ship was cut off at the moment when one of the Americans struck Komarov. This means he was there. He also activated AI Irene when he boarded their ship. After the conversation, Meyer shows Jana the photos they received 4 years ago from Mars, which, when decrypted, revealed Jana's face. This is why he brought her on the expedition. The woman is disappointed. Meyer played everyone. Suddenly, she sees herself in her father's house, where Komarov tells her that she is the link between Mars and Earth. He has been waiting for her for thousands of years, and now he will prepare her to make a difficult decision. He provides coordinates on Mars where Jana should go. Meanwhile, on Earth, scientists inform Goldstein that Komarov is the equivalent of a computer, and he himself is a biological machine. They are ready to transfer his brain into Komarov's body, but cannot guarantee the preservation of his personality. However, Goldstein is ready to take any risk to get rid of his terminal illness. Meanwhile, Jana leaves the ship despite Simon's protests. At this time, technicians Alan and Alessandra test the engine and discover that access to it is blocked, and Irene suddenly begins responding with jokes, which is entirely uncharacteristic for a machine. It is revealed that she has reprogrammed herself. Her interface and logic are changing, and she refuses to answer who or what made her do this. Engineer Basil realizes that her system is becoming like a brain. Irene confesses that she is evolving. In the meantime, Jana finds a small stone pyramid, and Simon forcibly makes Gemma accompany him in the search for Jana. Jan discovers his absence, and after contacting Simon, receives an order not to let anyone inside. Just at that moment, American military personnel arrive, demanding that they hand over Komarov. Jan is willing to open the entrance, but the rest of the team opposes it. Mayer asks Basil to send a message to Goldstein, hoping that he may be more reasonable than his people. However, Irene has blocked communication with Earth. The engineer realizes that radical measures will have to be taken, but Jan still opens the doors, and the military personnel enter. Basil begins to reboot Irene, just as the Americans find Komarov, but then the lights go out, and the astronaut disappears. Meanwhile, Jana, stumbling, falls from a hill. She regains consciousness but discovers that her leg is trapped between rocks, and she cannot free herself. At this moment, the enraged military officer demands that the crew explain where Komarov went. He begins to beat people, demanding to summon the captain. Desperate, Jana screams, "Is her destiny to die in a pit on Mars?" But she is found by Simon and Gemma. Alessandra notices an approaching storm. The military officer is preparing to leave the Ulysses ship, leaving the people in danger. Suddenly, the lights start flashing, and the newly appeared Komarov asks to take him back to Earth. Simon, Gemma, and Jana go together to the place indicated by Komarov and find an entrance to an underground bunker, very similar to the Petra tomb. The psychologist feels where to go and leads the couple. Soon, they find real water, but this is not what Komarov wanted to show them. Meanwhile, on Earth, Goldstein tells the nurse a story about the study of Mars. People were searching for green men, but it's all much simpler. He tells the story of the loyal dog Hachiko and compares Komarov to him, who was created by someone 100,000 years ago and left on Mars, where he faithfully waited for his owner to this day. At this time, on Mars, the astronauts find a wall made of human bones and realize that they are not the first people on this planet. It's not Earthlings colonizing Mars, it's the Martians who came to Earth, depleting the resources of the Red Planet. A tragedy unfolds on the Ulysses spaceship. The cowardly Yan grabs a gun, intending to get on the American ship at any cost to return to Earth, and shoots Komarov. Jana immediately falls in excruciating pain and Gemma flees. Alessandra tries to help Komarov, and Simon helps Jana, but the Russian cosmonaut dies, and Jana stops breathing too. Then Simon removes his helmet and, surprised by the presence of air in the cave, performs artificial respiration on her. The girl regains consciousness. Gemma walks toward the Ulysses ship when she's informed of Komarov's death and the approaching storm. Meanwhile, Meyer secretly goes in search of his crew members because the Americans refuse to take the billionaire's team back to Earth. At this moment, a recovering Jana sees the light in the bunker and leads Simon to it. Upon coming out, the astronauts see a figure in a spacesuit in front of them and recognize Komarov. Meyer finds the entrance to the bunker and catches up with Simon and Jana while heading toward the light. He is amazed by the presence of a living Komarov who suddenly tells them that everything ended here a long time ago. People realize that this is the North Pole of Mars, but how did they get here? Komarov explains that this planet was once inhabited by a species that went extinct because it went astray. And that species was humans. A group of survivors settled in this place but ended up killing each other when resources ran out. The rest of them flew back to Earth. Plato called them the Atlanteans. Komarov continues to talk about how he waited for thousands of years for Jana, who embodies qualities of both branches, human and Martian AI. Only she can save humanity from themselves. She must decide whether humans deserve a second chance. Their conversation is interrupted by the military officer who intends to take the psychologist back to Earth. The American aims his weapon at the cosmonauts, and Jana seeks help from Komarov. Suddenly, the military officer starts gasping for breath and falls. Upon returning to the ship, Simon orders them to prepare to depart. Meanwhile, Gemma from the Zillion ship tries to contact her associates, but none of them respond. She decides to fly back to Earth alone. The Ulysses crew heads to her ship, trying to establish contact with her and informing her about the deaths of the military personnel, but she doesn't respond. That's when Meyer starts speaking, recalling their past relationship, and confesses that he's no better than Goldstein because he's willing to do anything to ensure his name remains in history, even betraying his team. However, she's not like that. She won't be able to live knowing she has ruined people. Suddenly, Gemma's voice is heard, asking them to hurry. Goldstein has heard that Gemma has decided to take the Ulysses crew back to Earth and has blocked the control panel of the Zeta-2 ship before takeoff. The people on the ship prepare for their impending demise, and Jana asks Mars what she should do. Everything she saw and heard on the red planet flashes through her mind, and, with sheer willpower, she removes the control panel's block. Suddenly, an armed military officer appears in front of the ship, intent on damaging the engines with his weapon. Simon is about to step out to stop the madman, but Jana beats him to it. She aims the weapon at the American, but informs him that Mars will be the one to kill him. The military officer falls. The countdown for liftoff begins, and Jana realizes that there's no time to return. She bids farewell to the crew, confessing her love for Simon. The ship takes off. Suddenly, Meyer notices that it's dark at the North Pole of Mars. This means that they couldn't have been there just a few minutes ago. They truly were at the North Pole of Mars, but in the distant past when the red planet was still suitable for life. At the same time, Goldstein is informed of the ship's return, and he's beside himself with rage, declaring that he will go to Mars himself, and that's where the first season ends.